Welcome to the March 7th, 2017 meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council. Thank you for joining us. Madam City Attorney, would you announce the roll?
Let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Council Member Sawyer.
Thank you. We had two pieces of study sessions today. One was an interview of candidates for our Board of Building Regulations Appeal. And Madam City Attorney, would you report on the second one?
Both items were closed sessions, and the second item, there was instruction given to the labor negotiator.
Thank you. And we have a proclamation today for Women's History Month, and Mr. Rogers has this one. If there are some people here receiving the proclamation, you're welcome to come down. And, after it's read, no, come down now. After it's read, you may say a few words. You can go back and forth as often as you want. Please, you can stand here. Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
Whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our society in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. And whereas American women have played and continue to play a critical economic, cultural, and social role in every sphere of life by constituting a significant portion of the labor force working inside and outside of the home. And whereas American women were particularly important in the establishment of early charitable, philanthropic, and cultural institutions and provide the majority of the volunteer labor force. And whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background served as early leaders in the forefront of every major progressive social change movement in not only securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also that of the abolitionist movement, the emancipation movement, the industrial labor movement, the civil rights movement, and other movements such as the peace movement, which creates a fairer and more just society for all. And whereas, despite these contributions, the role of American women in history has been consistently overlooked and undervalued in the literature, teaching, and study of American history. And whereas the National Women's History Project and National Women's History Month began here in the city of Santa Rosa, and we are proud to recognize 37 years of work on behalf of equality for all Americans. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Mayor Chris Corsi and the City Council of City of Santa Rosa, do hereby recognize the march as designated as Women's History Month.
Let's all do it. Sure.
We're jumping up. I would love to. Thank you so much. Someone will start this timer for me, right? Okay, so for the record, I'll state my name. I'm Rebecca Slay, and I'm here today on behalf of the National Women's History Project. And as always,
Up just a little bit.
okay. As always, it is a great honor to accept this on behalf of the project from all of you. I love how you mentioned that the Women's History Project and National Women's History Month started right here. It's a real tribute to what ordinary people can do to make an impact and an influence on society as a whole. It was started by ordinary people with a vision of the things that America stands for: fairness, opportunity, a just society, not that everybody gets what they want, but that there's a method to the madness, that if you work hard and apply yourself, and a meritocracy, you can advance. It's now a nationwide and a worldwide phenomenon. Our largest user of our services is actually the U.S. Armed Forces, because since women have been able to participate. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this better? Great. Since women are now able to participate in the military, they've been able to spread the influence of the American values around the world. I'm going to talk briefly about one woman from California who made a huge, huge difference. Her name was Clara Shortridge Folt. Some of you may have heard of her. She was the first woman to pass the bar in the state of California in like 1912 or something like that, before women could even vote. And one of the many things that she did was she started the public defender system. And at that time, our public defender system was the only one in the country, and it was adopted immediately by 36 states out of something like 42. She was also the person that felt it was important to separate juvenile offenders from adult offenders. The whole notion of rehabilitation, that we could take people and teach them skills and they wouldn't have to rob banks or make moonshine or whatever they were doing. So she's a pretty inspirational person, and she couldn't even get into law school because she was a woman. So she just studied and took the bar, and bang, that was that. By the time she was finally accepted, she was too busy to go to school, so that was that. The impact and importance of all of our voices has never been more obvious than it was on January 21st. Julie was there, Chris was there, I was there, and 7,900 of our nearest and dearest friends. And I also want to thank you for making that possible, City Council. But it wasn't just here in California. As you know, that was a worldwide phenomenon. On all 7 continents, people rallied to say the America that we've known all of our lives is still alive. The American values that we care about are still important. Let's hear it for those 11 scientists in Antarctica who made some signs and gathered so we could do that. Actually, the numbers were in California, 1 in 8 citizens participated in the march. And across the country, it was 1 in 12. So the voices of ordinary people are being heard. And if you were here last year, I talked about policy and how important policy is. The small decisions that you make today are going to make a huge impact down the line. So I want to thank you for that. So actually, I said I accepted this on behalf of the project, but I accept it on behalf of the 8,000 people who marched with us, our children, our grandchildren, and all the people who are going to come down the line to say, America has its expansions and its contractions, but it's going to keep moving forward. I always leave you guys with the same quote. I know that some of you have heard it before, but it's just too good to not share with everyone. And it's even more true this year than in previous years, and it goes like this. We are in for a very long haul. I am asking for everything you have to give. We will never give up. You will lose your youth, your sleep, your sense of humor, your arches, and occasionally the support of people whom you love very much. In return, I have nothing to offer you but your pride in being a woman, all the dreams you've ever had for your daughters, granddaughters, and nieces, and to know that at the end of your days, you can look back and say, just once, I gave everything I had for justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Slegg. I do have one card on this item. Peter Cherneff.
Thank you, Mayor. Are we on? Are we on? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I just wanted to share my support and admiration for powerful women. You know, better than a good bottle of wine, I preferred listening to Dr. Jill Stein. And, you know, I really liked 12-term Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. She absolutely was not a corporate ninny. She was a very powerful woman. And then we got Elizabeth Warren, who was like an eagle soaring. And she was silenced in D.C. for speaking about Coretta Scott King's speech. What kind of lesson is that for us to teach? I've done a lot of reading. I've never met Judy Berry, but I understand that she had some serious courage that she did carry. Julie Butterfly Hill, 2 years up in a tree. Cindy Sheehan, making her anger as public as can be. Rosa Parks, who said, no way am I getting up on this bus. Angela Davis, Dolores Huerta, Norma Ray, women that went beyond and above just marching. They saw the fruitlessness of protests and demonstrations, so they took it to a higher level. They went Gandhian. I like Naomi Wolf. For those young students here today, you want to look up Naomi Wolf. She's one of the smartest women on the planet. And regarding these marches, I see them everywhere, and I just try and imagine. I never want to get on the bad side of women because I know how dangerous that can be, but I can just imagine how upset they'll be when they figure out that these marches have been supported by and sponsored by a guy named Soros, George Soros, a billionaire. And they're sort of like anti-Trump marches, but the problem is that George Soros, the billionaire, and Donnie Trump, the billionaire, are good friends. And so there's like another agenda that they're doing. They want to create friction. And so while the women are being bamboozled to the fact that this is a billionaires club with the Bushes and Clintons and Trumps, all on the same page, orchestrating and staging all sorts of scenarios as to pit Americans against each other, even American women against American women, acknowledging that we do have differences and also that we've been deceived for decades with a lying, slanderous, mudslinging media running shotgun. But let us be clear and free of all fear. We have a common enemy far greater than our differences, these billionaire bankers and their bar lawyerly minions, always in service to the IRS and Fed. So maybe we ought to do a 40-day strike and knock them dead.
Thank you. Mr. McGlynn, staff briefing.
Yes, item 8.1, Art Space Market Study of Artists, Creative Individuals, and Art Organizations' Space Needs and Preferences. Dave Gwine presenting.
Mayor Corsi, members of the City Council, you'll see Nancy Manchester's name on the slide. I'm pitch hitting for her today. She's up behind me. She had surgery on her ankle. So, good afternoon. This is an opportunity for you to hear the market results from ArtSpace Inc. Regarding the survey they conducted. It started in 2016. They're pretty positive results. I think it'll show the affordable housing needs and preferences of our creative community and also touch on some of the economic development benefits. So with that, I'd like to introduce Terry Drever to walk through the presentation.
Oh, there we are. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I am Terry Deaver with ArtSpace. For the record, I also have colleagues here with me that I'll introduce after in the event that you have some questions. For those of you who are not familiar with ArtSpace, we are a national nonprofit real estate developer for the arts. We have a mission to create, to foster, and to preserve a affordable space for artists and arts organizations. And we do that primarily as a developer and a long-term steward of the projects that we own and operate, and we do that as a consultant to share our knowledge. We have 46 projects nationally. We're based in Minnesota. We have satellite offices. I happen to come from Los Angeles. When we talk about projects, we're talking about live, work, affordable spaces. We're talking about studio spaces and other non-residential space for nonprofits and small entrepreneurial businesses. The things that we have in common primarily is our projects are all affordable, they're all self-sustaining, and they are all built in partnership with communities and with community partners. Our largest project, if you don't know, happens to be in California. It's 100 units of affordable housing for artists and 24,000 square feet of incubator space and creative business space in Santa Cruz, so not too far from here. On this slide, you can see that just to give you a visual, if you're visual people, of where we're doing our work. The green designates projects that we have in development, and then the brown, they're projects in operation and a lot of the consulting that we do as well. But we were here to talk about the market study, the work that we most recently did for you here in Santa Rosa. And the goal of the study primarily was to find out how much space is needed by your creative community, what kinds of space, what types of amenities and special features will really make space work for your creative community, and that to utilize that hard, fast data to encourage and to give confidence to funders and to potential partners in making a project happen. And next slide. These are just some images to give you a sense of some of our projects nationally, but we can go on to the next one. So the key findings, we had two surveys, one of individual creatives, one of businesses and organizations. And of the for creative individuals, you see nearly 400 people came out and took this survey. And I should say when we launched it, we had a full house of artists and from your community that came out for that. And of those, nearly 200 were actually interested specifically in affordable live-work space. for themselves. And I think the really key point of these findings is that 67% of those 200 households income qualify, and 60% are below area median income. So they are members of your low-income community right now who don't find the kind of space that they need for their home, for their families, and for the work that they're doing. Next slide. So just a quick snapshot. There's a lot more information in the full report, but I thought it might be interesting to see that we're talking about artists of all disciplines. We've got visual artists, performing artists, literary artists, musicians. And again, really importantly, these are artists that are in creators that are in your community. 66% currently live in Santa Rosa and are in need of new space. And 18%, 35, have actually left Santa Rosa for one reason or another, but really want to return for an opportunity like this. Next slide. We also did a survey of the organizations and businesses. 47 is a really good number for a community of this size. So these are nonprofits, these are for-profits, they're small, maybe emerging, just starting off businesses, and nonprofits and businesses that have been around for a really long time. And 42 of them are interested in some kind of new commercial space, whether it's for rehearsals or for performance or for retail, lots of different needs, but they have specifically noted their desire to be a part of a creative community and a facility of this nature. Next slide. So what does this all mean? So we look, it's one of our feasibility factors to look at market. And what we glean from all the information in the much longer report is that up to 66 units of affordable live workspace is supported right here in Santa Rosa. Up to 29 in studio and work-only spaces in addition to those live-work spaces. And then also there is a need for what we call commercial space, but we're talking about nonprofits and small businesses, for about 13,000 square feet. And again, this is based on markets. So if you're looking at a single facility, there'll be more testing to be done in terms of financial feasibility of what people can pay in terms of their commercial space and what the market can bear. But just in base of need, these are operating organizations and businesses in your community that are requiring new space. Next slide. So next steps, for art space, again, we work with communities. We look to you as city leaders, we look to city staff, to community members, other organizations, to let us know what their priorities are. If this is something that's of interest, it's something that we are always happy to talk about. How do we move forward? What does that mean in terms of partnership? Because we work in partnership. At the pathway of a typical art space project in particular, our first step is to identify our partners. Our next is to identify funding that can help with pre-development. So those are all the costs that take us up right to construction, but it's also the small seed funding that goes into projects that helps to leverage the millions of dollars that go into a facility of this nature. And we work again with the community to identify the sites, to decide exactly what that concept is, what the goals are, and to also identify what other goals in the community there are that a project this can meet. Is it transit-oriented development? Is it getting people living and working in your downtown? Is it economic development and tourism? What are the goals of your community that we can help meet? We have projects that have nonprofits that couldn't find other space but are serving homeless youth that are in our project, as an example, as part of our commercial tenancy. And just keys to success, whether it's our project or other types of projects of this nature, we think ongoing outreach to the arts community, making sure this diversity is there, that everybody has a voice at the table across age, ethnicity, cultural disciplines, what other partnerships can be in place, and again, aligning with community goals, and then just sharing. We hope that these results will be shared broadly, because while we believe in the projects that we do and what they can do for communities, we also recognize that there are other developers and property owners that maybe didn't know that this need existed, or how to build space, or what people need, or what they can afford to pay, and now they'll have this information, so we hope it's shared. But with that, thank you for your time. If you have questions, I'm here to answer them. We also have our Senior Vice President of Property Development here today, Heidi Zimmer, and then Wendy Holmes, our Senior Vice President of Consulting and Strategic Partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was involved in a side conversation when you sat down. Could you tell me your name again, please?
Of course. Yeah, Terry Deaver.
Terry, thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions, council? I have a couple, or maybe one. So for funding of these projects, typically, where does that funding come from? Is there a typical funding pool?
That's a great question. The funding itself can sometimes change. The pools are pretty standard. So affordable housing dollars, our project, as an example, in Santa Cruz was a 4% affordable housing deal. When that was created at the time, also there was redevelopment funding, which I know has gone away in California, sadly. But there are other types of resources. But we also have a component that is philanthropic, typically 15 to 20% philanthropic. There are mortgages, private investment in the projects as well, around 10% or so, and the rest comes from different types of county, state, sometimes local subsidies, sometimes in the form of land, sometimes in the form of dollars that are already allocated for affordable housing.
Okay. And clearly, there's a great need for affordable housing of all kind in this community as well as everywhere else you go, I'm sure. How do people qualify to become residents of your developments?
We hire, first off, so you know, locally. We work with local management companies that work in affordable housing, and that's what they do. And so anybody is welcome to apply for a project. They go through the same type of criteria in terms of their income qualifications and other background checks and such. But in terms of the artist preference is how we approach our projects. We look for artists and their families that have a commitment to an art form, a commitment to the community, that this type of space is something that's necessary. And we set up boards that review each applicant according to fair housing laws, and we give a preference then to those artist families that have passed through that particular process and otherwise qualify for affordable housing.
All right. And did your study, did you get down to the detail of identifying potential sites in Santa Rosa?
We did not as part of the survey specifically. We did ask artists and businesses as well about their interest in particular areas of Santa Rosa, whether downtown or the area that you'll be annexing later in the Roseland. There were just different quadrants of the city that we asked about, just sort of generally. We were here in 2015 as part of a pre-feasibility visit where we did some really preliminary looks with city staff at just available both private and public types of opportunities, just to get a sense of the makeup of the city, but there's absolutely nothing specifically that we are looking at.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of cards on this before I go to the public. Are there any? Yes, Mr. Rogers.
I just wanted to ask a quick question about your methodology. You have quoted in here 51% of the people who were surveyed want an affordable live-work space. And I know that you do this around the country, so maybe it's not the same in each location, but we have huge issues with affordable housing and with housing in general. So how do you parse out the difference between people who want a affordable place and a person who wants an affordable art live-work place?
That's an interesting question. One, I will say, just starting with that percentage, it does differ in different communities. It's interestingly more on the high end here than some communities where like 20% or so are interested in live work, because maybe it's not, affordable housing isn't as much of a crisis as it is in this area. I don't know if that gets part of your question, and I just kind of went off. What the other half of your question was?
Is there anything in your methodology that would look at this and say that the 51% might, how do we distinguish between people who are looking for affordable units versus people who are looking for art live work?
Thank you. In this particular survey, we focus specifically on live work as opposed to just housing. We have done surveys in the past where if there are developers who really are looking at dense developments, they want to do micro units, let's say for instance, or typical just regular housing. But we lead with the question about live work. And what we found nationally is just that artists have, maybe not every discipline, but most disciplines have a unique need for space in terms of having a little extra height, a little more open floor plan. And we're talking about art spaces or projects. That's really what we're talking about. It's affordable housing model, but we're designing them for artists, and we are maybe making them a little bit bigger than you might typically find and cutting back on something else instead. So we don't differ between the artists that need just housing and those that need live work. but we ask about what their needs specific are specifically to that live workspace, like what kinds of features and such that might make it different than a traditional housing. But we also ask about families and children and things like that as well to get at what other needs there are within the residential component of the project. Does that help answer?
Mr. Schwedhelm?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. And this question may be more for staff. How does this fit in with our housing action plan, and or what would be the next steps with this information we've just received, and who would be doing what?
We see it as intersecting with Program 5 of the Housing Action Plan, where it's looking at an affordability component. One point we'd like to make is that some of the funding that Terry just described includes like vouchers, HUD-VASH vouchers, 4% tax credits, because to your point, Councilmember Rogers, is our affordable housing demand includes artisans that are also low income. And so that's how we would differentiate that process. And so weaving that funding together would be key. Next step is to now work with ArtSpace on more specificity on probable sites, the cost, the partnerships, things of that nature.
Mr. Tibbetts?
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm very excited that the city is thinking about this and willing to move in this direction. This is everything I could hope for. I love that you're including affordable housing as a component. I love that it's thinking of the artist community. So yeah, you'll have my support going forward.
Further questions? Yes, Ms. Combs.
Thank you. I think this is a pretty exciting project, and looking forward to it. I wonder, I'm not sure who answers on this one. Seems to me this is a good investment for our community, and I'm not sure if I'm seeing that data or if I missed it somewhere. If we did something like this, it seems to me that it would pay dividends to our community in a number of ways. Is that information here?
This was information to show the market demand, which is strong. But to your point, Council Member, is you think about the urban 3 concepts that the body has been studying. This is right in that methodology where the intensification of use and the land use values of density would apply to a project like this. So that's an example of the economic development component. Plus, folks visiting artisans in their workspace, the sales tax component, things of that nature. Go ahead.
If I may, if it's of interest to you, I don't have it with me, but we did commission a study of some of our oldest projects at ArtSpace, and we're happy to share that with members of the council that look at the benefits to the community as well as the benefits to the artists in our projects.
Thank you. It seems to me that one of the questions as we go forward that we'll need to be grappling with is we have limited financial resources, and I would argue that we have other populations that also have great need. We have an exploding senior population who will need accessible units to be built soon. We have homeless people, we have veterans, we have families who need more than 1 or 2 bedrooms as growing populations. So when I'm looking at putting resources to a particular specific population, in the back of my mind, I have the other populations in mind as well. And one of the things that this speaks for is that if it generates resources so that we can then also house other people, that really helps this project move forward. So I'm hoping that you'll make some of those financial arguments. I see the quality of life arguments because having a vibrant arts community is fabulous for our city. I want to like this project. I do like this project, but I will want you to sort of talk to me and persuade me why I would put my money here and not for another population. Thank you.
It's such an important point, and although it's a small piece of what you're trying to get at, I want to mention too that the projects in our experience are incredibly diverse. Artists are incredibly diverse, as you know. So we do have formerly homeless people in our buildings and people with disabilities and seniors, and it's something that too, just within the project itself, if we can help solve some of that, we would want to as well, in addition to looking at outside resources. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to public comments. First up is William Bacon. He'll be followed by Judy Kennedy.
Thank you. My name is William Bacon, and I'm not used to speaking here, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'd like to first address the question of resources and families. I know families are always the key word, but you know, there's a whole lot of single people who would like to be represented and you know, be heard, especially when it comes to affordable housing. Artists very often live on the very verge of poverty, you know, as a dedication to their work, and are very rarely valued. So I would really like to, you know, have you consider that, you know, in this process. I've taken some notes here. Affordable work-live spaces, you know, in this county, I live in Del Nido apartments, and when I moved in there, I thought, wow, look at this, you know, big private enclosed patio area. I'm going to be able to make art. Well, I'm not allowed to keep paint out there. I'm not allowed to keep tools out there. I'm not allowed to keep art out there. I'm not allowed to work out there. I'm not allowed to do yada, 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 yada. So I need a place where I can feel safe, maybe to even make a mess, you know, and make art, you know. And I want to live in the same place that I make art, because if I want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning with an inspiration, I want to make art. So, you know, it's important for us as community to value artists, not to just support the opera or the ballet or dead artists. They don't need that. You know, we are a resource. The Russian River has the Art Walk, you know, which brings a huge amount of income into the businesses there downtown, and allows artists to be there unmolested on Fridays the first week of each month. We bring richness to communities, and places like San Francisco, as the .com and other things have come in, have forced artists and musicians to move to Portland. You know, do we really want that happening? Is that a message we want to send to the children? I would like to say that I was one of the people on the survey, and I appreciated that so much. I'd like to mention the Shimmer Makerspace out in the eastern part of the county that allows artists to come in and membership and use amazing tools, and I would love to see a place like that as part of the commercial aspect of something like this. But, you know, a downtown complex would be great, but also an industrial complex, someplace out further on the peripheries, you know, would be great if it meant more space and the ability to have more flexibility in the activities that go on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. Judy Kennedy, followed by Peter Cherneff. Judy, why don't you just give those to, we'll pass them down.
Yes, good evening, Council, Mayor Corsi and Council members. My name is Judy Kennedy. I live at 620 Oak Street, and I want to remind Council, especially people that are now on Council since 2010, which is a good number of you, that the Juilliard Park and the Burbank Gardens neighborhood came together in 2006, and that's the top copy here. We came together to asked the city to change the general plan so that the Santa Rosa Avenue corridor, which is your second page, between Sonoma Avenue and Highway 12, would start moving out auto-oriented retail and bring in retail, housing, and artist workspaces. This is specifically brought out in our original document, what we want our park and garden gateway to look like. We're in the art district, and there are already many artists that already live in the South A area, the SOFA district. So hooking on top of the burgeoning SOFA district, and I'm talking 10 years ago, we were interested in getting housing, especially for artists, and live workspaces for artists over retail. And there's also areas I want to just point out on page 2 that we have 11 acres, which is the blue area, 11 acres of blacktop. This is either parking lots, used car lots, empty used car lots, radiator shops that have been torn down, 11 acres that this group could work with. And I want to mention that right now, several of these properties are for sale. Also, the Astro Motel, which is a 2-story old motel from the 50s, is in foreclosure. I want you to notice this. It's in foreclosure, surrounded with a chain link fence. You could make a live workspace out of those rooms tomorrow by knocking down a few walls and incorporating, let's say, 2 rooms together so that you had a workspace on one side and a live space connected. And put in some skylights, whatever, and you will have an inexpensive live workspace right now at the corner of Mill and Santa Rosa Avenue. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Peter Cherneff.
Thank you. I really struggled with something I heard down there before from one of my favorite people, so I gotta say, truly, truly, Miss Combs, Julie, what other groups do you see that are not in possession of some artistry? As an artist, I'm the best, I'm the worst, I'm the blessed, I'm the cursed, I be you as you be me, and we're here to set it all free. Isn't that what artistry is all about? I am all things, the true spirit sings, and by their fruits they shall be known. Artwork quite beautiful, unto their spirit dutiful, like organic farmers, the delicious crops they have grown. Like the musician in tune with the cosmic physician, orchestrating together for the promise to requisition. Yes, by their fruits they shall be known, our eyes, our belly, our spirit, they fill by their artistic efforts sown. In the promised land they will all fare well, but we still reside under that cracked Liberty Bell. While others highly paid operate as professional thieves, similar to some of these rulers of religions whose forked tongue truly deceives. And so, the artists be pure in the spirit of creator. They prefer part of the cure by freedom as liberator. There's tons of opportunities to make this happen. Just so you know, I'll give you a big secret. I was a famous artist in the 2nd grade. All right, I left that behind, and I was also an incredible singer, an acoustical shower singer, but that only gets you so far. But the fact is, everybody in this room has done art at one time or another, and it'd be a lot more fun for anybody at any age as opposed to TV and cell phones, given a choice. And so there's plenty of big buildings around, but you know, once again, I don't want to be negative all the time because I know there's some attorneys that try to do the right thing. You 5%ers. The Ghost Ship Warehouse was an arson orchestrated by a man named Peter Larson. And it was done so that people would not be able to utilize big empty spaces, or there would be so many rules and constrictions it would make it impossible. But you know what? It's time for us to sweep this baloney aside and make these things happen. It's a beautiful, we're the most beautiful county in the world. We've had the most famous cartoonist in the world here. You certainly have the imagination to make this happen. You have empty buildings. Stop letting the negatives or the they're not even laws. What are they? They're codes and statutes. Cast them aside. That's not part of the Constitution. One way to get the Constitution going is to act like it's there. And I know you already care. So thank you for blessing me with your time. True artists have the power to shut down all this crime. And there's artists up there in front of me on the city council as well. So it's time for us to weld that cracked Liberty Bell. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the council? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There was a question. When does this come back? What are we looking at here?
We're at work.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, do you have any report?
Nothing to report.
Ms. Stricker?
I have nothing to report.
Thank you. Any statements of abstention from council members this evening?
I'm going to be abstaining from item 13.1 out of an abundance of caution, given my role at the St. Vincent de Paul.
Thank you. 11.1, mayors and council members' reports. Who wants to start? Go ahead, Mr. Tibbetts.
So I hope this is the appropriate time to bring this up, but I'm looking to my colleagues, somebody for a second, to put on the agenda a motion to direct staff to find a Housing First specialist to come speak to the full council as well as the public. You know, a lot of us had the opportunity to get really well informed on this issue at the homeless summit that took place a few weeks prior, but I think it might be important to have a professional address the whole council.
We, at this point, have on April 4th scheduled I guess it's tentatively scheduled. We don't actually have the agenda finalized for that date yet, but a full discussion of our homeless plan and policies. And I expect that talking about Housing First will be a significant part of that. It will definitely be a part of that. Whether we need to find a specialist, I'm not prepared to second your motion right now, but there are other council members here. Yes, Mr. Rogers.
I'll second to move the conversation forward. I know we'll have another opportunity to sort of talk about the scope and the scope of homeless services before we vote to put it on the agenda. But if Councilmember Tibbetts would like more information, I'm happy to second.
I think if we're doing it on April 4th, it might be wise to have somebody speak to us at that meeting about it to help direct it. I'm open to that as well.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. That's all it takes to bring it back next week, and we'll bring it to the full council next week. Thank you. Anything else? Mr. Tibbetts? Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I and a number of my colleagues had an opportunity to participate in Read Across America last week on Dr. Seuss's birthday. Big shout out to the various elementary schools that hosted each of us. I had an opportunity to read A Fish Out of Water and The Cat in the Hat Came Back to 3 different classes. Really enjoyed myself, and it's one of my favorite things we get to do each year.
Ms. Combs?
It's hard to beat that one. That's a fun event. So I just want to mention that today at 5 p.m. a number of women are standing up for Planned Parenthood. And I understand that some of them will be protesting or cheering in support of our congressional offices. I'd like to hand out some material. I attended an ABAG meeting that involved, here, just take that chunk, involved a quick review of some of the legislation that's going forward. Some of these are placeholders, and it's a little early to have a full conversation about them. I have enough extra for the city manager to have one as well and maybe pass it along. There were a couple that looked particularly interesting and that I understand MTC, or the League of California Cities, is also following along. AB 73 is one of those. There's been a lot of conversation around AB 1551, which involves emergency shelters. The League is currently, I think, opposed to AB 35, but I understand MTC is following it closely. In any event, there's a document here. There's sort of a package, AB 71, 72, 73, 74, that MTC and the League are following. League has taken no position on AB 71. ACA 4 is interesting because it's a vote to lower the ballot threshold to 55% from the 2/3 vote for some affordable housing funding. And it would be really nice if we could lower the threshold. We'll see what happens with that. It's not clear if it will. If it doesn't die, right? SB1, I think both the League and MTC are looking at that. And I think we have SB 1, 2, and 3 on our agenda somewhere. There's also a Costa-Hawkins Act review going on. I've asked for information about Palmer and whether that's being revisited, but I haven't gotten it yet. And the League also has an interest in a bill called SB 11, which might, I guess the concept has to do with ERAP, which is something I'm not going to explain right now, but apparently would allow increased development in transit-oriented developments. So I thought we might be interested as a group in that one. I also understand the League is looking at AB 852 and 8879, which seems like an odd number, which involves the non-governmental constraints on construction. A considerable part of our conversation was that involved how cities and municipalities get pointed out as the reason why there isn't construction going on, and yet cities don't build things themselves. So there are other influencing factors. There's an interesting article in Finding Solutions to the Affordable Housing Shortage in our Western Cities Guide that really lists some of the other conditions that influence whether housing is being constructed or not. You'll also notice in the very back of that document, there is a chart of the annual new housing permits statewide, so that folks who might be interested in looking at how we're doing with building housing statewide, there's a graph in there. There's also a graph, yours folds out, mine's impossible to read, of how the Bay Area is doing on meeting housing goals. So we're having a lot of conversations regionally with regard to housing and housing issues. It is important to remember when reading this chart that this is the first of about 7 years of looking at these numbers. So if we're a seventh of the way to the goals, that's not a surprise. It's the beginning of that process. I wanted to ask, while I'm talking about housing, if we can make sure, specifically ask the city manager, again, as I look at the list at the end of our agenda, I'm not seeing anything regarding our 5-program multi-point housing action plan, either on the calendar or in the pending. So I'm hoping that perhaps the city manager can let us know when to expect to have some of those items come to us for action, because it's a housing action plan, and I'm getting a little concerned about it. And I wanted to thank you again. Take care.
Anyone else? I want to give a short report on our downtown subcommittee meeting this morning. We had an update on efforts to form in our downtown a property and business owners improvement district that's moving forward. A short report on our progressive parking project and policy that's going to be coming to the City Council next week for a study session. That's the 14th. I would like to note that we've been seeing larger crowds showing up for the downtown subcommittee meeting, which is a good thing. We've been having it in this room instead of up in the conference room. Also, Councilman Rogers mentioned the Read Across America Day, which was a very fun time. I went to a couple of schools and read Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who, which I hadn't read in a long time since my kids were little, but it has a great message about how all voices matter, especially the smallest. And speaking to kids who were asking really good questions about why some minority groups are not welcome in this country and questions along those lines, I felt it was a really important message to be reading to those kids. On Sunday, I was able to attend the National Arts Program exhibition and reception at the Finley Community Center. This was a really a nice event that featured more than 200 artists, local artists, from small children to professional artists. And I think that I did want to mention it based on the report that we just had from ArtSpace. Well done by our Recreation and Parks Department. That concludes my report. So at this point, we are to 11.2, and the council this afternoon interviewed applicants for our Board of Building Regulations Appeals.
Public comment?
Sorry?
Public comment?
We are appointing David Cooper, Ron Cantu, Stan Clark to full terms, and Peter Hendrickson to the one-year term that's open. And thank all who participated in this, and appreciate everyone who's willing to give some time to their city. Number 12, approval of minutes. Does anyone have any additions or corrections to the minutes of January 31st or February 7th? Sounds like those are good. Consent, Mr. McGlynn.
Item 13.1, resolution, extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency.
Council, any questions on this? I do have a few cards. Mr. Canini.
Mayor and council members, first, this note about an abstention. I think the people should be clear and understand that an abstention, just like Councilmember Sawyers did at the last meeting, is in effect a no vote. Absent, abstention, no votes all act the same as a no vote. It's not a neutral position. Prior mayor didn't seem to understand that what happens is items come before this council for approval, and it takes a majority vote, usually a simple majority. One night it came out 3-3, and the mayor of Santa Rosa City asked, "What do we do now?" He didn't understand that you're seeking approval requires a majority vote. So don't let anyone be fooled by an abstention. It's a no vote. Yes, this certainly should be supported because we do have a housing emergency. There's no question about it. And those of us who have homes may not feel the emergency so strongly, but the people who are out there and who are dying out there feel it. You've been sick, flu going around, have a headache, need to use the bathroom frequently. Supposing you were out on the street in that condition, would that be an emergency to you? Supposing you were menstruating out there on the street, would that be an emergency to you? What some people forget is about this private property where they say, it's mine, it's my property, I'll do with it as I want because it's mine, I got it. Well, realize that what everybody has is based on two things. One, your own efforts, and the efforts of others, of those who have gone before you. And that's why we all have an obligation to the people here. Imagine this. Imagine what you have. Imagine your 3-bedroom, 2-bath, TV, all the stuff you got. Now imagine you were born in a third world country. I'd hate to name some, but let's just pick Somalia, the Sahara. How about the Yukon? Do you really think you'd have that? Do you really think you'd have that if you were born in Afghanistan or in India? No, you wouldn't have that house. It doesn't even fit there. It's incongruous. The reason you have it here is because you are here, and those who have gone before you have done what was necessary so that you could get what you've got. So you private property owners who think it's mine, I'll do what I want with it, realize you have an obligation, and partly what you've got is due to the efforts of others. And this housing thing is part of the fraud perpetuated by the Federal Reserve Bank. Don't forget that. Thank you.
William Bacon. Be followed by Mark Holtz.
Thank you again for the chance to speak to you and everyone here. I'm going to just say, that I'm going to put myself out there because I think that it's important for us to speak to the personal nature of this issue. I was born and raised in the Salvation Army and spent my entire life, and my whole family spent their entire life in service to people in need. And we wound up ultra poor at the very end. Okay, I have been a dedicated artist, and at one point my whole town in the East Bay got poisoned by Unical, and I got left with a heart condition and loss of everything, and was homeless the first time for 2.5 years before I got help, because I'm a man and I could express my need. When I was homeless again, 16 months living in my car before I finally got a voucher and got into Del Nido Apartments, where I have been treated very, very badly and will be now evicted on April 10th. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't lie, I don't steal, I don't sell drugs, I don't do any criminal activities, so I'm forced to live on disability of $890 some a month, which I don't know how you can survive on that. I barely do. Thank God for food banks. I want to say that I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to the conference on homelessness that just occurred, and I'm used to going to these things and being the person that speaks up and makes everybody hate me. And I didn't have to do that at this conference, because the guy Ian from Canada laid it all out. The man is, in fact, an amazing, amazing expert, and I want to personally thank Jenny Lynn Holmes for making hearing him for 2 days possible. I was there from beginning to the bitter end, and I did not miss a thing, and it was mind-blowing. And the thing that I want to say to each one of you as you listen to these issues and consider the housing first message is that eliminating all of the support programs and interim programs to focus on housing first is not an excuse to eliminate all those programs. Those programs are all necessary until we get the housing model first, mechanism in place and going. And I want to state that one of the most outstanding messages in that 2 days was that case workers are key, and they deserve to be paid more. They told us that a caseworker should never have more than 12 clients at a time. I am so grateful for my caseworker who makes so much possible for me, and he has 60 clients. 60, not 12. So I'm about to be homeless. I hope that you will help us.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. Mark Holtz, followed by Peter Chernoff.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Holtz. I'm a very concerned citizen. I love Santa Rosa. I moved here about 30 years ago to work on the Chronicle, to which I drove every night down to San Francisco, but I always came back to my lovely town of Santa Rosa. I'm a little concerned. I'm also a board member of the Bennett Valley Homeowners Association, and my concern is about the homelessness in this city. I'm concerned about items that were brought up in our meetings over a year ago about the homeless encampment on Bennett Valley Road that's been there. As of yesterday, myself riding my bicycle, I saw rats infested within the trash that was out in front. I've got accosted on many different corners, people asking for money, actually putting their hand into my car, and my daughter asking, why are they doing that? I show no respect for the homeless. What I would like to know is, what is our city council doing about this problem? How are we going to resolve it? When I looked at Morgan Street the other weekend when we had the brew house affair, Morgan Street was cleaned up. Morgan Street's dirty again, and I'd like to know why. I'd like to know why we're not helping the homeless. I'd like to know why aren't we moving forward in something that's really important, because it makes our city look really sad when you go down 4th Street and there's people begging for money. And I show no disrespect, like I said, to the homeless people. I want to help them. And I'd like to hear what the city council has to offer, because I've made a number of phone calls. I've talked to the police department. I've talked to Catholic Charities. I haven't gotten an answer. And I would like to hear what you people have to say, if it's possible today, on what we're doing about this situation, because it is an issue that is going to continue to grow, and it's going to hurt our city. So if it's possible to have these questions answered, I'd like to have them done so, if it's possible.
We're not doing it now. This is public comment time. After the public comments, if any council members want to comment on this item, they will do so.
May I ask one question?
It's time for you to make comments to us. We don't get into a back and forth here.
Then my comment is this. Our city is getting destroyed by people that should be helped. And our city, in my opinion, is not doing the job that should be done. You do not see homeless people down in Grayton, and excuse me, not Grayton, but down by the casino. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of support for their homeless people. We're taking advantage of a situation and not looking at it properly and stating facts that we need to have stated. Who's responsible to do this? Catholic Charities cannot do everything. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Peter Chernoff. Be followed by Karen Jones.
Yes, the homeless, well, I'll say what I've said before in part. You know, who's being tested? Those with buildings and roofs over their head, or those without? Or is it both? You know, even as a kid in high school, we heard the term about being vigilant. And it seems that we have not been vigilant, and things have crept up in so many ways. The Fed was mentioned. You know, we have the Fed, we have the IRS, we have millions of bar lawyer, minions of them, and all in service to fallen angels. Are we really dealing with a spiritual thing? Of course we are. Everything is spiritual first and foremost. It's the worldly people that make a lot of money that tell you to look the other directions. And so, We have not been vigilant. We've cared not when millions of other people lost their homes to bankruptcies. But then again, maybe not all of us are supposed to come through this. Many have been selfish, blind, and greedy, almost as a population. But in the biggest picture, everything is as it need be. So what's the answer? You go to a lot of poor countries that were mentioned before, and you don't see these big houses, but you see not destitute homeless people really so much, because they're always given something or somewhere to lie down. It seems to be the case. But here, people get all dressed up and drive to their so-called nonprofit church and pass by the homeless. We shouldn't allow any immigrants in this country till the homeless situation is squared away and the children are off the streets. So what's the answer? As we do unto the least of me was always a reference to the animals, you see. As the lion lays down with the lamb, attains peace, for it signifies no more bloodshed, yes, all to cease. We have all possessed the power to close every slaughterhouse, forever being kind to the whale, to the mouse. The story be true today as another version back then, for such was the message of Daniel in the lion's den. So the king then freed Daniel and all of his men, for they all walked as vegans and would never harm a wren. Yes, that's why the lions refused to attack, that being the message that I send. The 40-day strike, she be the call. Free them one, yes, free them all. The mystical, magical path that walks us into the promised land as we be the power and the time is at hand. You're not going to get anything solved with the homeless or anything else until you let the animals go, whether you're a millionaire or on the street. If you're involved in the murder of animals, you're just as guilty.
Thank you. Karen Jones.
My name is Karen Jones, and I'm a member of the North Bay Organizing Project. I have been working on the housing issue for the last 2.5 years. I want to have the rent control passed because people like me, we have a rent increase, but we don't get salaries increased. And it makes it very hard, and we will be homeless if we get several more increases and we don't get any income. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. Council, this is a consent item. Are there any comments, questions?
I put in the card to speak. Is that non-agenda items that we just spoke on?
No.
Okay.
This is the consent calendar. Mr. Tibbetts being absent, I will move that we adopt the consent calendar.
Second.
Your votes, please. We have 4 ayes. Thank you. Now we have 4 ayes. Okay, now we are to item 14, public comment on non-agenda items. Mrs. Gomez, do you have cards on this? Ian Seeley, followed by Peter Cherneff.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It is so nice to be back. I've missed these cozy Tuesday afternoons. My purpose for being here today is to urge everybody in the room and everybody who's listening or watching a video to please get out and vote yes for Measure A. It is very important for us to establish the precedent for the city's measure that's going to be coming up, that the marijuana industry and its users should pay for rather than for the taxpayers to pay and the general fund to pay for the necessary involvement of local government in the industry. So please do vote for Measure A today. Make sure and get to the polls. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Chernoff, followed by Dan Noble. Dan Noble, followed by Adrian Lobby.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Dan Noble, I'm a new resident as of a year and a half ago to Santa Rosa, and I wanted to speak to an item that's on your consent calendar next week, I think, and that is the amended and restated joint exercise powers agreement for the Sonoma County Waste Management Agency and Santa Rosa's involvement in that. I'm the executive director of the Association of Compost Producers, which is the state association for that industry. In addition, I've started participating in the local council, Compost Council of Sonoma County. I know that you are planning to, extend the membership in that agency, and I heartily support that because I think the agency is doing a great job and will bring composting back to our county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Adrian Lobby. She'll be followed by Elizabeth Nealon. I know that, Elizabeth. I couldn't read it though. Ms. Lobby.
Give me just a second. I wanted to use the overhead and I've never done it before.
If you want, you can use this.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Let me just turn it off.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a little topic of the chat program. One of our members of Homeless Action has put in an application for a chat site at 203 Davis, which is off the 6th Street viaduct. And we've done a little petition drive to talk to homeless people about this project and if they were in support of it. The petition reads, "We, the people of the streets, the undersigned, would like to support the proposal to open an encampment at the 6th Street undercrossing at 203 Davis property. We will run the encampment and keep it clean and use correct facilities." We have gathered 171 signatures from homeless people for this project. And I bring this to your attention partly to let you know, like the artists, that there is an immense demand for people to have housing and housing situations that are not currently available. And also to make a note that people are offering to run it, keep it clean, do the things that need to be done. These are homeless people who obviously have a lot going on in their own lives, and they're willing to step out of and do something extra for the community. So this application has been in for over a month, and we have heard nothing back from it. So we would like the staff to move something forward with this. If this property is not appropriate, we'd like to know what is. And thank you for that. I wanted to just mention one thing about the artist project, that the study work that's being done. As you know, I'm sure most of you, that there are a lot of homeless artists. And we see them in the project that the library had for a while, where they ran some classes. And we see it in a regular art project that goes on at the Wellness Center up at Sinead. And so this is definitely a population that needs housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Elizabeth Nealon.
Whoa, hey. Another day, whoopee. I'm so glad I could be here. And nice to see you, Jack. First time I've been here since you were seated there. I spent 6 hours yesterday with John Jankel sitting in one of his offices listening to about all the evidence about 9/11 and reviewing some of the details. And the two details that stand out the most for me is that on October the 16th, 2002, which was about 13 months after 9/11, Public Law 107243 was passed, which gave the President of the United States full authority to use the military as he deemed necessary. So it was an emergency measure, but it's never been rescinded, right? So that's been in effect all this time. And I heard on Berkeley radio that they didn't say imperialist drone assassination policy, but I would have to say any drone assassination policy is basically imperialist doings, because who else would think of killing people without a trial, without any kind of, open investigation that, So I heard that, that the drone assassination policy had been expanded. That's kind of off the subject a little bit, but the other thing that stuck out to me, and I hope, it's right here. It says that Larry Silverstein, who had leased the Twin Towers, he was just 7 weeks into a 99-year lease. And those infested buildings were totally toxic with asbestos. And the city of New York wanted all the asbestos taken out, and then the buildings could be taken down. But that would be so costly. So why did he rent it, Well, anyway, I'm just here to talk. And I don't even see my numbers. Oh, I have a full minute left. I have to thank you for giving everyone the 3 minutes. It's been so cheerful to hear them, expound on their thinking. Because over at the Board of Supervisors today, they did it again. I mean, every time I've been there for like the last 3 times and today, they cut us down to 2 minutes. For no good reason. There were only 7 speakers present when they did that. 3 more did arrive, but there was no real legitimate reason to cut us down. Now, my eldest son has been homeless in Berkeley for at least a year. And it's been the most ugly, cruel thing I've ever seen in my life. And I've never felt the cruelty to the homeless as strongly as I have this year as we had all the cold and the rain. Someone dropped off a giant box to him. It was like 10 feet long, 4 feet high, and 5 feet wide, and said, if you can get this off our car, you can have it. So when I went to see him last week, where he lives near the railroad tracks on Gilman Avenue, and it's not really Berkeley, it's really a place called Oceanside. Thank you. He had this big old box, So like, that's a step up.
Mr. McGlynn, 15.1.
Item 15.1, report calling a special election to be held on June 6, 2017, at which time the portions of ordinance number 4072 that add chapter 6-90 to the Santa Rosa Municipal Code.
Mr. Canini, excuse me, Mr. McGlynn. Mr. Canini, public comment is done.
The card was put in 2 speakers ago.
I thought you just gave it to Ms. Gomez.
No, your new system requires us to go up there so that it can come down here.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. City bus. It's going to take this a while to get through. The last change that was necessary took 2 years to convince them their trip planner didn't work. Reimagining is going to create a whole lot of hardship for a whole lot of people. To nearly completely redo the entire Santa Rosa city bus system, which is like 19 routes, and eliminate some and make major changes. You're going to create problems, particularly for people who chose where they live so they could use the bus. And there are a number of people who are handicapped, and they're not going to be able to easily make it to another stop. That's one aspect. The other aspect, you're basically a hub and spoke system. Very few buses transit the entire city. So all these connections are going to be changed. And you're going to have people running around this city looking for which bus going where at what time. This is going to be a disaster. And if you don't believe me, I didn't know if I put it in my other emails, ask the drivers. Ask the TSRs, transit service representatives. The people who brought forth this reimagining, they left. They retired. They're handing this off to you. You're going to have to deal with it. Again, I ask you to put some general funds into the city bus. These are the least fortunate among us. These are the persons that are most severely impacted by the most regressive tax, which is sales tax, which is 34% of your budget. Why don't you kick a little back to them? And if you don't want to put general funds into the city bus, why don't you stop charging city bus? I believe you, city council, city manager, city attorney, all got their grubby little hands in that fare box. And they're taking money out from some of the least of us. These people pay their fares with nickels, dimes, and pennies. Plus, I got a whole list of things here you need to fix at the Transit Mall. After your $3 million+ remodel, it's worse than it was. Bunch of incompetence at City Bus. I'll give you one example. The clock. Grand Central Station, what's the iconic picture there? The clock with 4 faces. Primarily centered right in the main lobby. Where's the clock at the Transit Mall? You don't use the bus, do you? It's in an alcove. It's in an alcove. You have to go find it. Thank you.
Mr. McGlynn, let's try 15.1.
Item 15.1, report calling a special election to be held on June 6, 2017, at which time the portions of ordinance number 4072 that add chapter 6-90 to the Santa Rosa Municipal Code shall be submitted to a vote of the registered voters of the City of Santa Rosa and related actions. Teresa Stricker, interim city attorney, presenting.
Good evening, Council. On September 26th of 2016, a timely referendum petition was filed with the City Clerk challenging portions of Ordinance Number 4072, which established rent stabilization, eviction control, and other residential tenant protections within the City of Santa Rosa. The petition challenged all portions of the ordinance except the provisions of the ordinance that repealed both the 90-day moratorium on rent increases, which took effect on July 7th of last year, and the just cause eviction ordinance, which took effect on September 16th of last year. Both of those earlier ordinances have now been repealed. On September 26, 2016, the City Clerk submitted the petition to the County Registrar of Voters for a review, signature verification, and final count. On December 21st of 2016, the Registrar of Voters submitted to the City Clerk its determination that the petition contained a sufficient number of signatures of qualified voters. On December 23rd, the City Clerk certified to the City Council that the petition had a sufficient number of signatures to qualify for the ballot. And on January 10th of this year, the Council accepted that certification and directed staff to bring back to Council an appropriate resolution to submit the challenged portions of Ordinance Number 4072 to the voters at a special election to be held on June 6th of this year. The resolution that has been submitted to Council will accomplish that purpose. The ballot question set forth in the resolution is as follows. The title is City of Santa Rosa Rent Stabilization. Shall those provisions of Ordinance Number 4072 adopted by the Santa Rosa City Council that, number 1, establish rent control for certain residential rental properties in the city with 3 or more residential units
but only as to units that received a certificate of occupancy before February 1995. 2, prohibit landlords from evicting tenants of such properties except for certain specified reasons. And 3, provide other protections to tenants, be approved. It is my recommendation that the council adopt a resolution ordering a special election to be held on June 6, 2017, at which time the challenge portions of the ordinance adding chapter 6.9 to the Santa Rosa Municipal Code concerning, again, as to certain residential units in the city, rent stabilization, limitations on termination of tenancies, and the payment of relocation. And the payment of relocation assistance and other tenant protections shall be submitted to the voters. The resolution also would approve ballot language, permit the filing of ballot arguments, and direct the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis. Do you have any questions?
Council questions? I have a couple of cards here. Mr. Canini. Marlena Martirano.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Sure. Oh, perfect, thanks. All right. Hello, Marlena Martirano, and I'm here along with Karen, and we're representing the North Bay Organizing Project, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here to thank you for voting to put rent stabilization and just cause eviction on the ballot June 6th, for the hard work and time you've put into this, and for your careful consideration of the ballot wording. My active involvement began in May of 2016 in these packed chambers with students and other vulnerable tenants, holding a large sign, a Martin Luther King quote. It read, "The law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless." I was terrified and did not speak. I've thought a lot about my fear that day and its source. The enormous imbalance of power in the landlord-tenant relationship, past experiences of harassments, intimidations, and substandard living conditions were its source. Blatant and unchecked abuses abound and routinely toward the most vulnerable. This is a very, very bad moral indicator. Living under the heavy hand of landlords and what they can do puts enormous strain on one's overall health. It's psychological, cruelty, and tyranny. It's similar to an oppressor-oppressed relationship. Again, Martin Luther King, he says, it gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. But all that is changing here in Santa Rosa. Our community is coming together. Tenants are now supported by this council, community leaders, and those affecting real change. Our last city election brought in lots of money from outside sources. We, as a community, defeated those monies and influence, and will do it again on June 6th. Tenants are no longer powerless. We are here. We are loving, battle-tested, smarter, and committed to each other. In other words, resistance is futile. Thank you, council and staff, for supporting helping renters, and heartfelt thanks to all the landlords that will be voting to keep Santa Rosa livable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are all the cards I have. Ms. Stricker, I had asked you previously whether we could simplify and shorten the ballot question. And I gave you some language, and I'd like to read it to the council as a suggestion for alternate ballot language. And it would keep the same title, which I don't have in front of me. It says Santa Rosa Rent Stabilization, I believe. City of Santa Rosa Rent Stabilization. The question I'm suggesting would say, shall the provisions of the City of Santa Rosa Residential Rent Stabilization and Other Tenant Protections Ordinance that establish rent control for certain residential rental properties, prohibit landlords from evicting tenants of certain properties except for specified reasons, and provide other protections to tenants be approved.
Do you need a second?
I'm suggesting that language. I don't, I think Ms. Combs, I'm sorry, you have this.
I have the
And
item.
if you would like to move the item with that alternate language.
I'd like to move that item with the alternate language when we're ready to do that. Can we see the alternate language? Do we have it written someplace where we can see it?
I can put it up here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have no concerns with the alternate language. It is a simplified version of what you have here. It's entirely up to the council. One over the other is a policy call.
Do you want me to make the full motion and then we have the discussion?
Yes, please.
So the motion that I'm showing here that I'm supposed to make, I think something just odd happened. The motion I have is resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa 1, ordering a special election to be held on Tuesday, June 6, 2017, at which time those portions of Ordinance 4072 that add Chapter 6-90 to the Santa Rosa Municipal Code concerning as to certain residential rental units in the city, rent stabilization, limitations on the termination of tenancies, and the payment of relocation assistance and other tenant protections shall be submitted to a vote of the registered voters of the City of Santa Rosa. 2, approving ballot language as amended. 3, permitting the filing of ballot arguments. And 4, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis. Can I need a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions about the motion?
I'm having trouble reading that because it's so small. I need my binoculars. Shall the provisions of the city.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mayor. If I can just clarify what I thought I heard the city attorney say. So what I would not want to do is change any language, and I know this is briefer, but I know how the legalese, sometimes it's very specific. So did I hear you correctly saying that this language would represent the same information there and withstand any legal challenge that might come before us?
Both are legally adequate, sufficient.
Thank
They're
you.
just
Yes.
brown eyes, green eyes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I would like to say that this was a carefully crafted ordinance that we did pretty much in public, very open process for this ordinance. It's a little disappointing that the California Apartment Association and other interests have blocked our ordinance. And some of us think that some of the methods they used were deceptive in the way that they blocked our ordinance. A lot of misinformation out there. I think that this is a strong, clear ballot statement. I appreciate the work of the ad hoc committee on developing this statement. And I look forward to our voters doing their research and making a final decision. So I want to thank you as the ad hoc committee and staff for bringing the item to us.
Just for the record, the ad hoc committee is working on the ballot argument, not the ballot question.
Whoops. I thought you did this. This is the city attorney's work.
This is my suggestion of an edited version of the city attorney's work.
That the mayor did run by me in advance so that we could feel comfortable that the option was one that was legally sufficient.
Fantastic.
And so I looked at this in advance.
Thank you. I guess then instead of thanking the full ad hoc committee of 2 people, I will thank the mayor. But again, I'm really looking forward to this opportunity for voters to express themselves on June 6th. And I want to thank staff for bringing it forward.
Further comments, council? Your votes, please. We have 6 ayes. Thank you. 15.2.
Item 15.2. Report A, resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa declaring a fiscal emergency in the city as a result of the recent enactment of the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act and the passage of California State Proposition 64, Adult Use of Marijuana Act. B, resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa 1, ordering a special election to be held on Tuesday, June 6, 2017 for the purpose of submitting to Santa Rosa voters an ordinance of the City of Santa Rosa amending Chapter 6-04 of the Santa Rosa City Code and adding Chapter 6-10 of the Santa Rosa City Code to impose a cannabis industry tax on cannabis businesses operating in Santa Rosa. 2, approving ballot language. 3, permitting the filing of ballot arguments. 4, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis. And 5, setting initial tax rates for a 2-year term. David Guin, Director of Planning and Economic Development, presenting.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. I'm here with Assistant City Attorney Sue Gallagher as well, who was instrumental in helping pull this together. Before I begin, you do have in front of you revised resolutions that have some minor edits to it. We can get to that at the end, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that that's what you have in front of you. Those are available to the public as well. Those are non-material changes to the ordinance. Any other changes we'll talk about through the presentation if you so desire. So a little background on why we're here, how we got here. Back in 1996 in November, the state approved Prop 215, known as the Compassionate Use Act, that legalized the use of medical cannabis. In 2015, the state enacted the Medical Cannabis Regulation Safety Act, establishing the state licensing framework for authorizing local regulation of medical cannabis. And then recently, November of 2016, ALMA, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, passed, and which legalized the adult recreational use of commercial and personal cultivation. One of the key elements in here was the fact that it allowed cities and counties agencies to enact local requirements to develop requirements, rules, and regulations that fit that local jurisdiction's need. The other thing that it did is it allowed city and county agencies to authorize taxes on commercial cannabis businesses, and that's what we're here to do today. The city's response to all these 3 actions by the state has been fairly significant over the years. Back in 2005, the city when Prop 215 passed, the city allowed 2 dispensaries, medical dispensaries, to begin operation. And those have been in continuous operation since and are currently out there today. In 2016, the City Council made a development of a comprehensive medical cannabis ordinance a priority for staff. We've been working on that over the past year, and we're hoping to release a draft of that ordinance in the next week. January 19th, the council started that process, and in doing so, we established a medical cannabis subcommittee. That subcommittee has met, I believe, 16 times since its formation over the past year. Those have been public meetings in this room with a fairly good attendance for each meeting, where we've stepped through every portion of the ordinance development, through interim measures, and the tax discussion. In February, the council adopted an interim policies for cultivation, and that allowed us to begin permitting cultivation facilities through our interim until we came up with a complete comprehensive ordinance. In August, we went the next step, which was to fill in the gaps between a dispensary and cultivating all the support uses, the manufacturing, testing, distribution, and transportation. The council approved zoning code change to allow us to administer those, and we've currently been we've actively been permitting these uses, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. What this has done is it's identified that there is a cost to administering this program. There's a cost to managing this new industry into the city. It's fairly unique that we're starting a brand new industry from scratch with new regulations, new impacts to staff, new education, outreach, economic analysis that we're going to need to do to support this industry. We're bringing forward to you a proposal to do a tax to make sure that we don't have an adverse impact on our general fund. What we're estimating at this point is about $1 million of impact per year. As most of this information, we are learning as we go, and we're going to be evaluating this over the next few years to see what the true impact is. But based on what we know today from our interim ordinance, from interim permitting, and from talking to other cities, this is we're fairly comfortable that this is going to be at least this much impact to our operation, to the city. Because of that, what we're asking the City Council to do is to call a fiscal emergency, because the current business tax program that we have in place would not generate the revenue needed to support everything we want to do for this industry as we move forward. The impact to the general fund is anticipated if we don't find another alternative to how we supplement that, and that does affect other programs that we're trying to do as a city. The City Council must unanimously declare a fiscal emergency in order to bring this measure to the voters for a simple majority vote. In terms of the tax, there's two types of taxes that can take place. There's an excise tax and a sales tax. The excise tax is essentially a privilege on doing business within, doing something with property, so business license tax or transit occupancy tax. We currently have both those in Santa Rosa. All businesses in Santa Rosa pay a business tax. We have a current business tax program. We also have a TOT tax, which is the transit occupancy tax. Sales tax is the sales tax on a tangible product, and that's not what we're recommending today. What we're recommending bringing forward is an excise tax. This is a tax on a business for the privilege of doing business within the city of Santa Rosa limits. So the basic premise of this tax package that we're bringing forward is that the proposed ordinance authorizes the City Council to impose a cannabis business tax on commercial cannabis industry. The proposed tax is not a sales tax. It would not be imposed directly on the cannabis user or consumer. And the council can set or adjust rates by resolution up to the maximum set by the voters. This says at any time, but one of the changes that we've made, and I'll talk about it in a minute, is to give certainty to the industry. We've set a term for the tax to make sure that the tax doesn't change every month or unanticipated as people are setting up businesses. So I'll get into that in a minute. But the council will have the ability to modify that tax on a regular basis. In developing this, we took a step back, tried to understand what the city's goals were, and talking to the industry, what the industry's goals or concerns were. The city's goal was to generate the revenue needed to not have an adverse impact on the general fund, develop a tax that's easy to administer and easy to understand, so people understood what we were doing and how it was affecting their business, and encourage the industry to operate in this new market that we're creating, established by these new rules and regulations. The cannabis industry, one of the things we've heard was that there was a concern about layering of tax. So there's taxes that are being implemented at the state level on these businesses. There's also impacts at the federal level from not being able to write off certain type of activities. And then the local agencies have the ability to tax as well. So we went into this with that in mind to understand what that meant to a business running in the city of Santa Rosa. One of the other things we heard was the concern about certainty. If anybody starting a business needs to have certainty, they need to know what the next few years looks like so they can invest in a community and invest in their infrastructure to move forward. They also were interested in supporting essential programs related to the industry, so education outreach, economic impacts, and other things that would help this industry move forward as it evolved. So we identified 5 key decision points in developing this ordinance. There's a lot in this ordinance in terms of the nuances of how we administer the program, but these 5 key points are really the basis for how the tax is going to affect the end user, the business. The first one was where in the supply chain are we going to tax? And so I'll talk about that real quickly. The supply chain looks something like this. This is a simplified version. where a cultivator grows a product, could either go to the manufacturer and then sent to a distributor and then out to a dispensary. The other direction is that a cultivator can go right to a dispensary through a distributor. And there's testing throughout the process in various stages to ensure the quality of the product and then to the patients. The one area here that we've identified is the distributor. The state is still fine-tuning the rules in terms of how a distributor is going to operate within this supply chain. There's different methods. So there's the model that's been used on the alcoholic beverage side, and so we're waiting to see how that's going to play out at the state level to understand what that distributor role is going to be and how it might fit into this program. So what we did is in talking to the industry and to understand how that works, we've recommended to limit where our taxation points to cultivation, manufacture, distributors, and the dispensaries. We did not want to tax the testing and transporter because those happen on a regular basis. There's service aspects of their operation, and it would really amplify the layering of tax potential that we wanted to stay away from. With that said, anything that's not subject to this cannabis business tax, it would still be required to pay the standard Santa Rosa business tax. So there's still a business within Santa Rosa following the rules like any other business. The second key point was how to tax. So the taxation method. There's two different ways. Two different ways for cultivation and one way essentially for manufacturing, distribution, dispensaries. On the cultivation side, what we did is looked at what it would mean to tax it by square foot in terms of what the grow area is of the cultivation, and by gross receipts. On the manufacturing, distribution, dispensaries, we looked at gross receipts as being the most straightforward approach for those type of businesses. So we looked at both. We got feedback on both. One of the recommendation in the staff report and in front of you today is that we tax cultivation by gross receipts and manufacturing, distribution, and dispensaries by gross receipts. That's how we have it now, but the ordinance also does give the flexibility to the council to change that. So the council could pick square footage at a later date or some other combination if there's a desire from the council to do something different. So we can talk about that if there's questions on different methods. The third one, which is a fairly important one, is a cap on where the council has the authority to tax this industry. This is what's going to go to the voters. The voters are going to vote on this, and once this is set, it can't change without going back to the voters. So this is an important discussion. We looked at multiple cities that enacted taxes back in November. There are more than this, where we tried to cull the ones that had the similar type tax structure. Some people looked at flat taxes. Some people looked at different methodologies that weren't what we wanted to bring forward. So we pulled these cities from what we could find and found that in general, the taxes range from $25 a square foot, as high as $50, all the way down to $3 a square foot. These are caps on cultivation by square footage, so this just gives you a percentage, perspective of kind of where things lie. The tax that's out there right now that the county Measure A is proposing is at $38 a square foot. It's the second from the right. What we're proposing to do is have a cap at $25 a square foot, which is in line with most cities within the state. Again, we looked at this from a different perspective in terms of gross receipts, just understand where appropriate cap would be for gross receipts. There was a lot of discussion about this. There's a lot of reasons why a city chooses a cap. One aspect that we looked at is when businesses look to where to settle within the state, they typically look at the cap because that's where the potential is. That's where the council could go at some day. And so that was important. So we had that discussion at the subcommittee meeting. What we decided was that rather than 10%, which was our original proposal back when we started looking at this, and that's where the county is today, we decided to move to 8% as a recommended cap. That was decided with the subcommittee to give future councils flexibility, knowing that this is an unknown industry, an unknown field that we're in, not knowing how this is going to affect the community and the industry as a whole in the city, that they wanted that flexibility for future generations. But we understood that there's concern about that, and we've heard a lot of feedback that the industry would like that cap lowered for some certainty. So we found other ways to try to build in certainty into this ordinance to try to accommodate some of those concerns. And we can talk about those in a minute. So to recap on the cap is that the cultivation cap is at 8%. The recommendation is at 8%, and the recommendation, or $25 per square foot. And manufacturing, distribution, dispensary would be at 8%. And again, these are just those 4 taxation points, and that's all we're proposing to tax in this ordinance. The fourth element is the initial tax rate. So this is, once the voters give authorization to the council to set that maximum, the next step is to say, where do you want to start as a city to tax? This is going to be done by resolution. It will not be part of the ordinance, so this is something that you can update as needed on the term. And what we did is got a lot of feedback on this, and I wanted to put some of these up here just to give you some sense on how we came to these numbers. The first thing was we needed to have a tax rate, initial tax rate, to generate the revenue we needed to support these industry and the potential impacts. There was a concern that if it was too high, it would actually do the opposite thing of not attracting people to come into the industry and come into our regulated market. Again, understanding the awareness of the layering, what that taxation would be in the first couple of years to these businesses with the state tax and the 280E issues. And we looked at what other cities were doing around the state in terms of initial tax rates, and they were between 1% and 5% is where most cities and counties were starting from as a program. And then having an audit program to make sure, one, two, are we generating the revenue we need, but also is it the appropriate tax level, and what can we do to what do we need to recommend to the council to either modify that in 2 years, depending if it's too high or too low, and that's something we can bring back to the council in 2 years. To give you a sense of what's going on as of today, and actually I'll take that back, as of February 10th, it's changed since then. This is what we see in Santa Rosa. We have implemented interim policies. We are much further ahead than most cities and counties. We actually are permitting cannabis businesses as of today. We have, if you start from the left, as of the Planning Commission 2 weeks ago, we added 2 more to the approved cannabis sites. So we have 4 approved cannabis cultivation sites in the city of Santa Rosa. They are going to be going through their building permit shortly to start building. And so we have 6 more in the queue and 2 more going tomorrow night to the Planning Commission. Manufacturing, we have 3 sites that have been approved and 6 going through the permit process. And one of those is actually up and operational and is the largest in the state at this point, and one of the first manufacturers to be permitted. We have 2 distribution facilities going through the permit process, and we have 1 approved testing facility and 1 testing in the application process. So with this data, with this information, talking to those that are currently active within Santa Rosa, that currently are doing business within Santa Rosa, we spent a lot of time talking to them, understanding what their projections are, what they're hoping to generate over the next couple of years, so we can make sure that that tax rate that we're proposing is doing the job that I'm recommending to you, is to generate the revenue we need to not adversely affect the general fund. With that said, the recommendation was a 2% on gross receipts for cultivation, a 1% gross receipts for manufacturing. At this point, because we're unsure of the role of distribution in the supply chain, we're recommending that we don't tax that until the state figures that out, and then we can reevaluate that in 2 years. And dispensary is 3% on gross receipts for recreation only, not medical. And the reason for that is that not knowing where we as a city are going, if we get direction to start looking at recreational cannabis policy, then we want to have something in place that we can address quickly if that's where we want to go over the next year or 2. Just as a real note up here, basically it says that if at an average about 2% taxation, we would need to see about $50 million in gross receipts come out of cannabis businesses. And based on the activity that we're seeing now, the current businesses we have in place and the ones that are coming online, I feel I'm pretty optimistic that that's what we'll see, and we'll see that revenue come in over the next 2 years.
David, can I stop you there for just a second? I'm wondering where the average of 2% comes from, because we're looking at 2% on cultivation and 1% on manufacturing, and not having any recreational for a while. So
Yeah,
it can't be a 2% average to start out.
No, and I simplified that just to put it in perspective in terms of the magnitude of dollars needed to generate that type of revenue. We are seeing that we have more cultivation sites right now than manufacturing in terms of number of sites. So there's going to be more heavily weighted right now on the cultivation side in terms of numbers. But again, that could change depending on how we look at this. Again, this is a recommendation of gross receipts. If we do change that or have an option to do by square footage, that might change these numbers slightly. But even with the square footage approach, our gross receipts, the number of cultivation sites plus the number of manufacturing sites, I did a rough rule of thumb that is about an average of 2% impact that the $50 million would generate the $1 million.
And this $1 million in tax revenue, how long before we're collecting that much?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have again, one business up in operation right now. We have another manufacturer that's in build-out right now, working on constructing their site through the building permit process. And we have four cultivation sites that are going through the building permit process. So they're going to come online probably in the next, depends on how quickly they move forward through the process. Again, they're competing with housing and all the other priorities that you're hearing about. But we anticipate over the next year, we'll see this probably in year 2, we'll see the return on this $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The last item is the tax cycle. And this is a key point in the discussion about certainty for businesses. And when we started talking about the cap and the concern about that cap being an issue for potential business for Santa Rosa, we wanted to counter that with what could we do as a city to help provide that certainty. And so we looked at this concept, and this is a good concept that came out through discussions of having a set lock-in rate for the cap for taxes. Again, it's a common concern. The lock-in approach was identified. And what it does is it gives us time to generate information, generate data, so we can bring that back and present to the council on what's actually happening, what the impact is. And really a 2-year time frame is a long enough time frame that we could actually start to get real data that we can make decisions based off. The first year is going to be a little, as you just alluded to, it's going to be ramping up. We're going to see things change over the first year. Things are going to be coming online. On the cultivation side, just for a frame of reference, it is a use permit. It goes through the Planning Commission, and it's taking right now between about 7 to 8 months to get through that process. And there might be some people here that are going through that process right now, but it is a timely process, and so giving ourselves 2 years will allow us to address that. So the recommendation that we set forth in this ordinance is a 2-year cycle. Basically what that would mean is the council would have the ability to review that tax at a minimum of every 2 years. I'm sorry, a maximum of every 2 years. Minimum of every 2 years. So you could go longer if the council decides that things are working well. But you can, the certainty that we're providing is that we would not change the rates on a more frequent basis than 2 years. The other thing that we are recommending that's actually in here is that we included a provision that anything over 5% would require a supermajority vote. And this was another action that we could take to help provide more certainty to the industry, to say that if the council as a whole wanted to increase that rate over 5%, which was loudly heard from the community that 5% was really that breaking point, that it would need a conscious decision of a majority of the city council, a supermajority of that council. So that's something that is in this ordinance. The other thing that came up that we're...
Excuse me, just a supermajority being 5 rather than...
So there's different ways to do supermajority. We selected 5, but that's open for discussion. We'd be happy to have that conversation about what a supermajority would be, the council would feel comfortable with. But what's in the ordinance right now is it needs 5 votes to move forward. The last item that came up, one of the comments that came up, was a fiscal emergency clause to override this. At this point, we're not recommending this, and we didn't put this in here because of the fact that we have the 2-year check-in phase, and there's as looking into it, some potential unintended consequences of having that, the fiscal emergency clause and what that might mean to other things. So we felt comfortable that in the 2 years, we'll have time to reevaluate, understand what that tax rate is, and you'll have the ability to modify that tax if needed. Some other updates that we made to the ordinance is that we went from a monthly payment to quarterly, and this was due to how the operations happen. I mean, the cultivation operations or manufacturing operations, it makes it better for people to, or much more easier for businesses to come in and pay on a quarterly basis rather than every month. One of the things that we're going to have to figure out is this is a cash business, as you've heard, and we're expecting people to come into our finance department with cash, and so that's one of the things that we'll be working with our finance department to develop policies and procedures and how we do that, and want to make sure that it's safe for everybody involved in that process. We also had a section in here that we wanted to make sure that taxes applied to all cannabis operations, so that was addressed in this ordinance. And then the discussion in here about non-cannabis activities, making sure that they weren't lumped into this. So things like accessories and other things that could be excluded out of the business tax and pay the normal sales business tax if it's not a cannabis-related operation. And so we were aware of that, and the ordinance was written with that in mind. So those were the points that helped craft the ordinance. The ordinance is going to go to the voters and what we're recommending on June 6th. With that comes the proposed ballot language. So what we've proposed here and what we've run through the cannabis subcommittee, and just a reminder, everything I'm saying today has been through the cannabis subcommittee. We've talked about this in a public forum multiple times, and so we did get a lot of good input that we've tried to incorporate in what we're bringing forward to you today. The proposed ballot language, and I'll read it to you. It's a Santa Rosa cannabis industry tax measure. Shall an ordinance be adopted authorizing a cannabis business tax in the city of Santa Rosa on cultivation businesses up to $25 per square foot of cultivation area annually adjusted by CPI, or 8% of gross receipts, and on cannabis manufacturing, distribution, and dispensary businesses up to 8% of gross receipts, to maintain general funds for the city services and to address cannabis industry impacts, with all funds subject to audits and staying local, generating undetermined revenue until repealed. One of the reasons for bringing this forward now is we did look at timing and when to bring this item forward. So as you may remember, I believe it was a few months ago that we're planning to bring this item forward to go in conjunction with the county. At that point, we realized that the cost savings that we anticipated were not real, that we wouldn't see those savings to the city. And so we decided to hold off and bring that forward today. As you just took action on, having a special election with 2 items, we can share in some of those costs and help reduce the impact to the city as we move that forward. Again, if this does go forward and approved in June, the tax revenue through the remainder of the year will start to help offset some of the costs that we're currently incurring in administering the permits that we showed that are actively moving forward. And the other thing that's coinciding with this is the actual development of our comprehensive policy. It's been a lot of work, a lot of input. We're very close to releasing that publicly. I realize I said next week, and I saw a couple people grimace, but we're actively trying to get this out to the public as quick as possible so we can start to get feedback. That's going to eventually, we'll have time for feedback from the public. We're going to do public meetings. We'll take that to the Planning Commission, and then ultimately to the City Council for approval. And the timing of that lines up very closely to the enacting of this tax. So the June, July timeframe is where we're hoping to bring that tax policy to the City Council. And so those line up fairly well. So we have a couple recommendations for you tonight, and I'm going to do the first one, which is the recommendation of a fiscal emergency, and that's the first step. And if the council unanimously recommends that, then we'll move on to the ordinance. And we do have a few potential modifications that we want to recommend to the council as we move forward to that. But before I discuss those, we wanted to act on this first item to make sure, or answer questions before we even get to this point.
Council, any questions at this point? Yes, Ms. Combs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Excellent presentation. I just want to ask, and I asked you, I think, in our one-on-one conversation, to clarify for me that if we declare a fiscal emergency now, does that have any implications for our future budget going forward? Specifically, does that affect any future funding of items? It used to be that a declaration of fiscal emergency affected Measure O, for example. So I want to clarify that the implications this might have.
We did look into that and concluded that no, there are no unintended consequences that we can see. We've drafted this so it's very focused on that the fiscal emergency is related to the state's enactment of MRSA, the passage of Prop 64, and the efforts that the city itself is undertaking to regulate the industry. So it is really a very focused declaration.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you. And again, we're talking the full presentation questions on that, not just this one slide.
I think we're trying to move beyond the fiscal emergency first, right?
Okay, you want to stick with the fiscal emergency?
Yeah, I think we need to do that before we discuss the other.
Great, okay. Then I don't have a question on the fiscal emergency.
All right. I think we can proceed.
Okay, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, so I'm assuming then I would go ahead and introduce the resolution now. So I will move a resolution. The Council of the City of Santa Rosa declaring a fiscal emergency in the city as a result of the recent enactment of the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act and passage of California State Proposition 64, Adult Use of Medical Marijuana Act, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Okay, we're not going to vote yet because we've got several cards from the public. Do you want us to go through all of these first, though, and get them on the table, or?
Yeah, maybe we can have the conversation about the ordinance, because I'm sure most of the questions are about the detail in this ordinance. And I just want to also clarify that the resolutions that you are recommending are the edited versions that are in front of you today, the red line version.
Right there, the ones that are not redlined, correct?
The ones that are redlined.
The ones that are redlined?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies.
Yes, sir.
So do you want to take questions from the council on the rest of this?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this presentation and also the time spent educating those of us that aren't on this subcommittee with this topic. If we go back to item or slide 3, and my question is more about the methodology of impacts to the city's general fund. And if I can put this into context, that my understanding, what I heard you say is that the whole purpose for this tax is to not have the negative impact on the general fund. So methodology is, slide 3 shows this is what the impacts that we're anticipating of the cannabis industry on the general fund. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so with that as a premise, then can you share with me the process, the methodology that each of the departments use to come up with this? And I know you spoke on it briefly, that it's somewhat of an educated guess, but if, again, we're trying to tie it into making it revenue neutral, I'd like a little bit more information about how are these figures obtained?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is when we had multiple internal meetings on to identify what those potential costs were. I will preface this with, this is new territory. We're not sure what the full impact is going to be. Starting with code enforcement, we looked at personnel, how many people it would take to address some of the potential issues that come up with non-regulated activities, complaints from residents in neighborhoods, other things that we want to address as a whole related to cannabis. So we started with personnel, and we stayed with that number for now and to see how it will go. Again, this is going to be an iterative process that as businesses ramp up, as regulations take force, revenue comes in, and the budget time comes, we'll have to look at this on every annual basis with our budget to determine are those impacts being covered by that staffing level, and if not, we'll be asking the council to address that. The policy development and administration, this is going to be ongoing for quite a while in terms of the cost, and was based off of how much time we are taking just to do medical and anticipation of recreational. There's a lot of money that we've spent to date that will essentially won't recover, but we have consultant cost, legal cost, and which is in the next item too, our internal legal cost, which we work with the legal department to determine what impact that's going to be on an ongoing basis with these regulations as we roll them out. Public safety, this was a number that we talked with them about, and this is really more to support other divisions. As we've developed a regulated market, this has really shifted from a police effort to a code enforcement response effort. So the impact is mostly going to be to our code enforcement staff and not primarily to our police at this time. We have a large number of because this is so new, we're spending an enormous amount of time on staff time consulting and working with the industry to help them through the process, educating on how to develop the planning process, the building permits. So what we did is identify what it would take from a staff perspective to provide that service on an ongoing basis, and even more, taking that out and doing workshops, doing education to help move people through the process. And we have a lot of things like over-the-counter permits for manufacturing, for example. Manufacturing can get a zoning clearance doesn't cost anything, and it takes quite a bit of time of analysis to understand what that impact is and how to bring that through the planning process. So we're looking at how to manage that. Education's workshop and outreach, this is something that we want to make sure we're getting out to the community to understand what the issues are, not just the industry, but also the larger community as a whole. This was a placeholder we put in there to identify the funds to do that. And one of the things that came up near the end was the economic impact aspect of this. We want to be looking at what the impact to the community, the industry is having to the community, both pro and con, and be able to run those numbers, do those studies, bring that back to the council on a regular basis, use that data and information to help inform potential other tax approaches. And so that's going to be a key piece of our internal work those costs need to be covered in some way. The other thing that I didn't put on here was the policies and development for things like handling cash and how we're going to manage those things. But that's something we're going to have to work through and figure out and to see what that really means and what impact that's going to have. So.
Great, that was helpful. Then I had some questions about the audit, slide 9. How often would they be done? And is the city going to also be auditing its efforts in this area? Again, to look at both sides of the equation, this is how much the city is hours, however you would do that, but what would be included in the audit and how often would they be done?
So the audit that we're proposing here and that we're talking about with finance is if we do, again, as the program proceeds, if we do gross receipts, we will have to have some way to check in with the business to say, this is what the information we're given, does that make sense based on the type of production that they're doing, just to ensure that we're all on the same page. And part of this is an education process. So having our finance department using potentially an outside auditing service, just like the city's audited, we would use them to help educate the industry on the type of information, the type of data, and the type of financial data that we need as a city to feel comfortable with how they're operating. And that's going to be a learning experience. So this audit here is really an audit from our finance department and from the city to the industry to ensure that the information we're getting is correct, accurate, and in the format that we need.
And the other side of the equation, will there be any efforts to audit what the city is contributing towards regulation of this?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think that's something that we need to do internally. I wouldn't call it an auditing program. It is something that we're going to be tracking our costs to bring back as part of justifying what the need is. Because again, if we come back and say the actual impact's only $500,000, then we need to have that discussion with the council to adjust the tax rate accordingly. And so that's something that we'll have to do on an annual basis with the annual budget to inform the council every 2 years.
Great, thank you. And then just my last questions are about the proposed city tax ordinance, slides 15 and 16. Again, using what our intent is, can you share any information about the other jurisdictions that are mentioned in there? Let's just do the tax ordinance cap on slide 15. So you have Humboldt and Lee County, excuse me, at $3 up to San Jacinto to $50. Can you talk of, that's quite a big gap.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, if you don't know, but I'm thinking, are some saying, no, this is going to be a revenue generator versus a revenue neutral?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing here is a reaction to an unknown industry, a new industry, and you know,
I don't think that there's, I mean, I think one of the challenges here is that this is new, and I think you can make some suppositions about what they think their industry base is likely to be, and maybe you're looking at Humboldt and Lake and they have a very specific idea and they know what their industry is. And you might look at some of the other ones and say, maybe they don't want the business at all. I think it runs the gamut in those conversations, but I would hard pressed to say that there's fully formed ideas behind that, and I think that's what the team has taken a really hard, over the last year and a half, has been in a conversation to try to get the most concrete plan with the best rationale. I think some areas that have run to the finish line quickly, I think there's been a question about what was the basis of their rationale. But it's a tough conversation because it's an unknown.
No, I appreciate it, and I really appreciate the efforts that the city's done in talking with folks from the industry, all of the efforts, because when any of these other jurisdictions can look at this presentation and it says this is what the intent of this is, and again, not being on the subcommittee, I don't know if there has been other research about these, like how did they come up with $50? You know, and then the percentage, the swing from 3% to 18%, quite extreme.
So one of the things we did do is look at some of the lower ones. In Humboldt County, Lake County, very different than an urban setting. So you have different issues, different impacts, and they're after a completely different type of market. They're probably outdoor grow and other things. In an urban setting, we even between us and the Sonoma County, we have very different issues and different perspectives on how to move forward on this. And rightly so, we have different landscapes, constituents, and infrastructure. And so we've looked at ours from a city perspective, and what does that mean from a city, and try not to compare ourselves to things like Lake County and Humboldt County and even Sonoma County to that degree, because as we went through this process, we found there are vast differences in our approaches and what we need as a city to protect.
And then I know you said it's still up for discussion, the supermajority definition, because obviously we have Measure O, and that's 6 votes. Mm-hmm. How do we land on 5 as a recommendation?
That was a recommendation. The recommendation was to go to supermajority, and we picked 5 as the basis. But we have heard that feedback, and we're ready to modify that if that's the direction of the council. We would recommend that would be a reasonable approach to go to 6 to be consistent with other voting blocks. But that's up to the council.
Thank you. That's all.
Councilman Rogers.
Thank you very much for your work, and I know that there is a lot of uncertainty that we've talked about on the subcommittee and throughout the process. One of the things that I feel relatively confident about is that if we go too high on this tax cap, people won't come out of the black market and they won't become legitimate businesses in our community. And if we go too low, we're not striking the appropriate balance for what you're talking about of getting enough money to cover our costs in the process. So I'm particularly curious on the per square foot conversation because when we came out of the subcommittee, I know we were looking at $38 per square foot. You've brought it down to $25. Was that due to some of the conversations about congruency between $25 per square foot and the 8% tax cap?
Yes. So the recommendation when we brought this forward to the subcommittee was just a gross receipts on cultivation. The feedback we heard was fairly unanimous that we wanted to add that option to add square footage. So went back and recalculated what a corresponding square footage would be to coincide with that 8% and landed on $25 a square foot.
So whether and I know that the resolution, we have the option of going per square foot or gross receipts. Ultimately, that's up to the council to decide in our programmatic rules, correct? It's not built into the ordinance, one or the other.
That's correct. That's correct. The ordinance allows you to do either or, and the resolution allows you to. The ordinance allows you to do either of them, and the resolution will codify how you want to do it for the next 2 years. And so it's the council's choice.
So I am as I mentioned, one of the things that we have been concerned about, that I still remain a little bit concerned about, is having the tax cap at 8%, given that our initial tax rate is so low. And so if we are acknowledging that we don't need to go all the way up to 8%, I always feel like it's going to be more palatable to come back to the voters and say we need to raise the tax cap than it ever would for us to come back and say, no, just kidding, we need to lower it. And I believe Santa Cruz did it the opposite, correct?
I don't know what Santa Cruz did. I apologize.
They set their initial tax cap, and did they have to come back and lower it?
I have heard that. I can't verify that. I apologize. But
yeah. That's just one of the concerns that I have, is making sure that we strike that balance. I think that the supermajority helps with the certainty for the industry. I'm also cognizant of the fact that one of the fixed costs for the industry is the layering of the taxes that you talked about, where we have a sliding scale based on percentage and based on per square foot, but the state, I believe, has a $150 fixed tax on particularly the cultivation that doesn't really leave us much room for some of those industries who are trying to come out. So I just thought I'd mention that. I also wanted to talk really briefly about the tax windows that the 2-year cycles we've talked about, I think, is pretty appropriate. There was some conversation that hopefully you could fill in the rest of the council a little bit on, about going to 3 years as an initial tax window, given that if this was to pass in June, a 9-month startup time might not give us enough time to have adequate data by the end of that first 2-year window to really make a sound judgment on it. Can you talk a little bit about why we shifted from potentially doing a 3-year initial tax window with 2 years subsequently to 2 years repeatedly?
Mm-hmm. So we did have that conversation in the subcommittee, and the way that the subcommittee landed on this was that they felt comfortable expanding the timeline, the cap, or I'm sorry, the term, if we did that within the resolution, and that gave more flexibility to the council to have that up and down. The alternative to that was to have it built into the ordinance so that it couldn't change. The 2 years was locked in, and so that gave more certainty over time. So we had that conversation, and my understanding from that conversation was the subcommittee recommended that we'd rather have the certainty of 2 years locked into the ordinance and not have to deal with it in the resolution. So some other places now that have this process already complete, they're having to deal with that in the ordinance, and in reality, it doesn't give that much certainty, because any council could change that ordinance at any time. And so it's a good faith effort of where the city's going, but unless it's in the ordinance, it's not technically locked in. The other thing that we identified was that we have businesses currently already operating, and some that will be up and running this year, that we will actually have more data than other cities and jurisdictions that are waiting until a tax is passed. If we were going to wait until June to actually start permitting, then I think that's a more valid point, that we wouldn't see anything for another 2 years. But we're off and running. We have active operations. We have people that are building out, and we have people that are all going through the planning process all currently right now.
And I was just going to point out that the ordinance sets that minimum of a 2-year term, and the council, of course, is free, as Director Ewan mentioned earlier. You can set that for a longer term if you choose.
And then I think my final question, the $1 million guess at what the cost is going to be, and the initial tax rates to cover that $1 million, that's based on what is currently permitted in Santa Rosa, or is it based on what is expected to be permitted? And could we end up coming over that $1 million if we end up approving, for example, more manufacturing or more distribution, or I guess we're not doing distribution right now, but more dispensing?
So it was looked 2 different ways. One was looked at what we currently have in place right now, and what we project based on the activity and interest that we're receiving through either permits or pre-application meetings. Those numbers got us close to that $1 million, knowing that over time, if we do expand and start to grow, so will our needs and our impacts. So the intent is that We hope in the next 2 years we'll generate the revenue we need over that time period, and at least we'll have data to know if we're on the right track. But I do fully anticipate that as we grow and as we expand and we start to add additional type of activity within the city of Santa Rosa, that those impacts will change as well. So to answer your question, that number is based off of a 2-year projection based on what we know today, what we anticipate, and adding a little bit of room for new growth coming in a year that we don't expect at this point.
Great, thank you so much.
Councilman Oliveros.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the committee really grappled with that time frame with the cap, and I think that the 8 is reasonable for us. We are dealing with quite a bit of uncertainty as we move forward, and then again, the industry also needs some certainty as well, and I get that. Quick question on page 20, on slide 24. You did mention, you referenced the inclusion of a fiscal emergency clause that would allow the council to override the tax cycle. Can you repeat what the comments you made on that?
Yeah, this is something that came up. It's not currently included in the ordinance. We felt that due to the uncertainty of the unintended consequences of having that clause in there in the fiscal emergency, what that would do to other things, as Councilmember Combs brought up earlier. We left that out, and the fact that we have 2 years until the council has a chance to address this again. And so we feel fairly confident that we can get through this next 2 years without calling a fiscal emergency, without having to address this tax, and we can evaluate that in 2 years from July. And that was the intent of not including it at this point.
So that would have been a different option of trying to accomplish the same thing, again, not knowing. If we didn't have the 2 year, then we would say, well, then we could declare a fiscal emergency to make some changes.
This was brought up actually to protect, to add more certainty for the city council.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're locked in for 2 years, that the city council has a way to say, well, everything has changed. We need to do something. We need to get in before that 2 years. But looking at what we have coming up the next 2 years and how this is moving forward, we didn't feel that was necessary, so we pulled that out.
Okay, and then looking at the second bullet with the supermajority provision, that would be needed to increase the tax over 5%, and the reasons that we'd be doing that would be what?
The reasons for that is that we heard from the industry that 5% was a big concern. That's where the industry was hoping the cap would land, is at 5%. So because we ended up at 8 and not 5%, we looked for ways to help provide some more certainty to the industry to try to address that concern. And so we used 5% as the threshold to say that if the council is gonna make that conscious decision to go over 5%, we would need to take that action, and it would take that extra step to do that.
And what kind of information would cause us to think about moving beyond 5%? That's what I'm looking for.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Examples, yes.
Yeah, it would have to be a pretty, basically expenses would have to be such that it's impacting the general fund the cannabis activities would be affecting the general fund in such a way that you would want to raise the taxes high enough to reduce that impact to the general fund.
So if we didn't do it, we would be going into a fiscal crisis, right? So I guess my point is that I would be agreeable to some flexibility as far as having a unanimous vote, for example, just because if it is going to be a fiscal emergency, then why would we not use the same rules? So instead of using a 5, we just go to a unanimous decision by the council that we need to go over 5%.
If I might just clarify a couple of points. Yes, you're free to set whatever supermajority you want, and it can certainly be a unanimous vote. We've drafted up some proposed language and specifically avoided the terminology of fiscal emergency because of the implications. So we will instead have the council make certain findings with respect to the impacts from the cannabis industry. The other thing that I just want to clarify as well is the ordinance does not set particular required findings. So the council, under the current way the ordinance is currently written, it would be free, depending upon whatever supermajority you decide on, to raise the rates really for whatever reason that you deem appropriate.
Okay. And we will be having more of this discussion with the other pieces? 'Cause I know right now we're at the point of the fiscal crisis declaration. And then and I think you mentioned that you had some other ideas or language and some other pieces that.
Yeah, I think we've kind of moved on to the ordinance discussion.
Okay,
and so I think it's a good time to have this discussion. So if there are things that we want to talk about potentially changing, we have prepared in the event that that was the case. So if there's things that you want us to evaluate, or if the council majority wants us to look at, we can respond to that now.
Thank you. That's the one thing that would open up for discussion. Then, again, understanding the concern about the 8% is how can we give them more certainty? Maybe that's an area that we can go to that might give that to them.
Councilmember Combs.
Thank you. Again, I thank the Cannabis Subcommittee. I am not a member, so I have some questions because I wasn't present for a lot of the conversation. And again, thank you for bringing this forward to us in a timely way. I would like to look back at slide 5. And many of you know, I know you two know very well, that I have a strong interest in community benefit or community impact reporting. It's been, I think, one of our council goals since, 4 years, and we're still waiting to have that conversation. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that last item on your list about economic impact research helps us there. So the comment I will make is not specific to cannabis, but it is always a concern when we don't show housing, for example, as an impact of industry coming in. In particular, we may, for example, need to subsidize housing for employees who make less than 80% of the median income or less than 50% of the median income, and this industry may have those employees. They may not, but I don't see any documents that support the concept that they're paying in excess of living wage, much less excess of minimum wage standards. They may be, but it's not presented to us. So if we're going to subsidize affordable housing for this industry or any industries, it seems to be missing from our costs list. Distribution trucks will be on roads, manufacturing trucks will be on roads, cultivation trucks will be on roads. Our roads will be impacted by this industry, and yet roads are not listed here. We need funding for road repair, I don't know how heavy this product is, but I'm guessing that a truckload is heavy enough that we should be taking that into account. So again, you can consider that part of community benefit conversation for multiple industries, but since this one is in front of me right now, I have to ask why those aren't here. And the 50,000 appears to be for research and studies, but not for addressing the exact impact. So are you planning to bring back something that will talk about the impact on housing and roads?
I think that's what we're trying to understand at this point. What's the information that we do need to bring back that the council needs to hear to help make informed decisions? And so what we're hearing from you, and I think you're right, we're hearing this from other industries as well, the impact to housing. Even talking to the cannabis industry, one of their big concerns is finding workforce and finding housing. So it's a concern. So I take that feedback, and I think that's what we're looking for, is that type of feedback. So when we can, over the next 2 years, we have that information that we can start to develop that kind of information and data and response to help inform the next 2 years and what that looks like for this industry.
Okay, so this $1 million that we're planning taxing for now doesn't actually include those impacts. And it concerns me that we're setting our taxes now without giving ourselves a cushion for those impacts.
So the cushion essentially is the cap. The starting rates are essentially the first 2 years just to get started to understand what that revenue is actually going to look like. Again, in 2 years, that's where you have the ability to work within that range. And again, what are those impacts, both pro and con? And I think that's what we'll have to look at.
Well, I think, Council Member, you're absolutely right that these are issues that we need to wrestle with. I think in the condensed period of where we're running to, I would say that, you know, this is a, your point is well taken, and that I think is part of the reason that we're having a conversation about where the cap should lie, because we don't know the full impact of the industry at this point. We still don't even know fully what the distribution really is going to mean to us in a conversation about what rates there's going to be. There's a lot of uncertainty unknown right now, and we want some room to evaluate that and have some room for council to have these types of conversations down the line.
Okay, good. Does the public safety or education component include enforcement for distribution to underage users or education of underage users, or are underage users and the problems associated with underage users included in this cost estimate?
Yeah, that was thought about and talked about specifically for the education aspect.
Okay.
So we've been meeting with the health officer of the county to look at, are there places where we can work together on outreach and education to schools and under youth and other populations.
I know we have a program where we check out whether corner markets are selling to underage folks as a kind of enforcement mechanism. So I wanted to make sure that the kind of enforcement part of that was here too. And just because of the times we are living in, does the legal support and oversight include any cushion for federal government intervention?
Those figures were not developed with that issue in mind, and certainly that may be part of a much bigger question.
Okay, thank you. I have a more general question. Are we legally able to tax, I'm looking mostly at slide 11. Are we legally able to tax in the supply chain points for any other products that have created enforcement needs? For example, wine, beer, tobacco, guns. I mean, is there anything in this? Are we singling out a group or?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Could we legally, if we wanted to, look at the other groups?
I think that's a separate question that we would have to know.
Not agendized. Yeah. I know the not agendized answer. Slide 26. The copy that I have has the word "or," and it says cultivation business up to $25 per square foot at annually adjusted CPI, or 8% of gross receipts. Can we leave the "or" in? It's at the third line down on the right. If you look, it says business, then it says $25, then it says "or." The "or" is in the proposed language I see here, but I'm wondering if, as a council, you're giving us flexibility in the ballot language. But as a council, can we embrace that flexibility and make our language "or" for that going forward?
So if I understand you correctly, yes, this language does give you that flexibility. In the resolution, we can give that opportunity. If the council wants us to provide the opportunity to the industry to choose if they want to be taxed by square footage or by gross receipts, we have looked into that. We can do that.
We could manage to do that. It would.
Based on the numbers we have, and we've talked about it internally, and
Okay.
again, for a 2-year period, I think we can manage that and then see how that works. Again, that would be something that we want to revisit in 2 years to determine how that's working. Is it
I want
impacts?
I want to express that, or we could consider doing one for medical and one for recreational. Because the real problem here, as I understand it, is that high CDB, low THC gross receipts or square footage, that makes a difference to the medical industry. Because if you're doing square footage, you're going to be driven to more high THC because it pays better per square foot. And I don't want us to be in a position of driving people to only doing recreational when I really think that we have some benefits from encouraging our medical cannabis field.
So that would be an argument for providing the industry the opportunity to decide which,
the option,
at least in the first couple of years, as we determine,
Okay.
are we going to implement recreational measures or not? And
Yeah.
that's,
I would be interested in hearing comments specific to whether we can leave it or whether there's a benefit to leaving it or. Let me see if there's another one. Slide 21. This is my last one, I think. Can we set, and again, I don't know if the subcommittee discussed this. Right now, it looks like we have an 8% cap on one thing and an 8% cap on another thing. And while the math isn't perfect this way, it's kind of 16%. Because at the end result, when you pay for the product, if you were at the top, if it were 2% and 2%, or 2%, 1%, aren't you paying the 3% when you purchase the product, assuming, of course, that the tax is passed on?
right. So again, like any business, they'll have to identify what their business practice is, how they manage that tax in their business, if they want to pass it on, take it out of their profits, how that works. It's completely up to the business, and the end result to the end user is going to vary, and we can't predict that. And that's again why it's an excise tax and not a sales tax. So we're requiring that it's not directly passed on to the customer.
Folks can decide whether or not they absorb the tax, but it's there on all the pieces that we tax. And
correct. So what we did is limited where the taxation points are to these 4 areas. So what you're saying is at the max, technically each one of these could be 8% if that's what the council wanted.
It's not our intention, but technically. So my question is, could we reassure residents by creating a total cap? In other words, we might fiddle with each one of them, and I don't know if the subcommittee considered this. Did the subcommittee look at a total cap so that the additive cap can be no more than X?
Yeah, so we did look at that. I don't know if I brought that to the subcommittee, but we spent a lot of time analyzing various tax methodologies. That was one option we looked at early on. One of the things we ran into very quickly was the fact that a lot of these operations are dispersed around the state. And so at some point you can only control what you within the urban city limits. So most times you don't have the start to finish it within the city. You have a distribution in Sacramento and a cultivator up in Humboldt, and they're bringing the product to Santa Rosa to manufacture and potentially sell in other parts of the state. So to say that we're going to put a cap on the entire supply chain it ended up being very disingenuous because we couldn't enforce that or actually implement that.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful, and I appreciate that you did that analysis. I understand we have a cap on business licenses also.
We do. It's $3,000.
Yeah, that's another thing we should have a conversation about. That's not on the agenda.
We're going to go to public comment. We'll start with Patrick Stubbs, followed by...
I'm sorry. Mayor, do you mind if I add a couple more things before we go to the public comment? So
go ahead.
That way that they can react to some of the things I've proposed. And I apologize, there's a lot of moving parts to this. After we put this item out to the public, we did receive some feedback, and we are recommending that we make some clarifications to the ordinance that you're passing.
Good.
So I just want to touch on those real quickly so that when the public comes up to talk, they can react to some of these proposed changes.
Good.
So we don't have to go back and forth. One of the first ones that we wanted to look at was in the ordinance on page 2, where we talk about the definitions. We have a definition of the cultivation area. And that cultivation area is a key term, because if we do tax on square footage, and I'm referring to, again, I'll put you right in the spot, ordinance page 2, section 6-10-040, and it's subdivision D. And it's the definition for cultivation area. The concern was that we weren't being explicit enough in this definition about how that cultivation area is defined. Again, it's important because when we do by square footage, that cultivation area is going to be the basis for how that square footage tax is calculated. So we wanted to add, before the statement as determined by the Director of Planning and Economic Development, we wanted to add excluding non-production areas. So essentially what this does is it taxes the grow area and excludes non-production areas. So things like walkways, ADA access, and that was the intent, but we want to make it very clear in here that we have that ability to extract that out. So we have recommended changes for that.
Mr. Rogers.
So in this exclusion, I know that there's a difference between a flowering area and the grow area, and I apologize, I don't know about the cycles well enough to really describe it. Does this change in the definition include taxation based on the square foot that includes the flowering area or just the grow area?
So we're looking at it as production area, so we would have to look at that. I think production is the growing of a plant, and so what we're excluding are things like walkways, tables if they're doing work within that area, and I think that was it wasn't clear in this definition, so we wanted to add that one clause, but I'd have to, at this point it's production of a product, it's the growing of a plant.
So it sounds to me like it'd have both then, both the flowering and the growing area.
That would be my understanding.
Yes.
Following up on that, then I would recommend that staff work and bring back at some point in the future an amendment that defines production area, because it's not in the definitions, and it's going to come up. I'm not saying you have to have it tonight, but
so if
we may want to have it in the future.
Right. So the way we're going to if okay with the council, for this purpose, just to provide clarity for the concerns that were brought up, if we add, and I'm going to read on this section, halfway down, room or area where cannabis plants are grown, excluding non-production areas as determined by the Director of Planning and Economic Development or his or her designee. And again, this is going to be something that we're going to be looking at over the next two years. We're starting to see permits come in, and so they come through our department, and we're talking with people about where they're producing, where their grow areas are, and we'll then take that information and submit that to the finance department to tax on. But we will address that as we go. So that's one that we wanted to make put out there that we're recommending to change. The second is on the enforcement provision. We found that there was some inconsistencies between how we were talking about it in the cannabis business tax section and how the standard business tax section talked about it. And it's in the ordinance on page 9, section 6-10.10150. We basically revised this section to only have one part to it. It's going to be one sentence under this enforcement to say, it shall be the duty of the collector to enforce each and all of the provisions in this chapter and this is the part we're adding, in accordance with the procedures of section 6-04.270 of this code. And essentially what that's doing is referring back to the standard business tax code where we already talk about this provision. So we didn't want to duplicate it in both places. We want to refer to where it...
Can you repeat the language?
Yeah, it says, in accordance with the procedures of section 6-04.270 of this code.
And I'll mention that that section 6-04270 is also within the ordinance because it had some of its own modifications, and that is on page 14, subparagraph F.
So that section now refers to this section, which is in the standard business tax code that applies to all business in Santa Rosa. And in this, we found that we needed to be more clear. So the second paragraph in section F on page 14, we made one change that basically says, at the direction of the collector, the collector's assistants and any city police or code enforcement office shall have the power or authority. So the intent here is that the collector may need to see a business tax license for a business, and it's the collector's responsibility to direct any employee, police, or code enforcement to carry out those duties. It was not the intent for police or code enforcement to enter any time and do what they need to do. So we wanted to clarify that it would be at the director of the collector because it's related to the tax certificate. So that's a cleanup language that we put in here, and that's going to apply to all businesses within Santa Rosa. So we're doing that at the same time so we can take care of it. Okay. So those were the two main ones that we wanted to make sure that we recommended staff that are modified based on feedback we received, and we felt that they were appropriate and clarifying to add to the ordinance.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Are we ready for public comments? Patrick Stubbs, and he'll be followed by Steve Monahan. There's a toggle switch down there. You can lift that up a little bit.
Got to put it up a bit higher. Hey everybody, thanks very much for taking the time and giving this the important consideration that it deserves. I speak on behalf of 5 partners, 3 of which are based in the local area here. We're building the leader in medical cannabis cultivation in Northern California, with 4 permanent facilities already in San Francisco and 3 under consideration in Santa Rosa currently. I'd just like to encourage you guys to set the rates at levels that make sense, that will enable Santa Rosa to create a new industry and encourages black market operators to become compliant. A max cap of 8% does not achieve either of those objectives. I would propose a 2% initial rate for a minimum of 3 years and a max cap of 5%. To me, that is the right level. I wanted to kind of speak about 3 things briefly. 1, a legal cannabis business is not profitable enough to sustain a high rate of taxation at the proposed levels. An 8% cap implies that 91% of our profits will be paid away in local, state, and federal taxes. I ask you guys to consider any other industry that's out there and compare this to that. Secondly, making sure that certainty is delivered is very key to us and our investors. A low rate of tax is important in doing that, particularly when outside capital is extremely key to getting these off the ground. There's 25 or so CUPs under consideration. That, by my calculations, is at least $50 million of investment into the city already, and at least 200 jobs, many of which paying above the minimum level. A low rate of 2% gets our investors repaid and our projects off the ground, and a max cap of 5% will encourage more to follow. An 8% cap, no matter what other protections are put in place, will scare away investment capital. And that's the piece that's key to building industry here. Finally, A 2% rate based on CUPs under consideration will translate to at least $4 million in tax revenue based on my calculations. That's well in excess of the $1 million that the city has said that it needs to put this program in place. An 8% cap renders the city of Santa Rosa anti-competitive versus the rest of the state. LA is voting on a 2% cap today. To give you some context, 27 of the 48 local governments sitting in your position have come out with a lower rate of tax than the 8% cap. Set the max cap at a rate that makes sense now and continues to encourage tax dollars coming in and employment for the city. You only get one chance to get this right. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Monahan will be followed by Tawny Logan.
Hello, City Council. Thank you for your time today. I just want to say, thank you to the subcommittee for all the work that they've done, and thank you to all the city staff for all the work that they've done in getting this moved along. I think that the cannabis industry is a great opportunity for the city, and I know that it's taking the proper moves in that direction. Having a high tax rate of 8% really is a disincentive for investors to come into this space, and is a bit of a putting your head in the noose, I think. There's a lot of opportunity in this space, but it's also a new space, and there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot of things that are yet to be discovered by us in the industry and by the cities that we operate in. I'd encourage you to create an environment of cooperation and an opportunity for everyone to figure this out and move things along. And I think that the high cap of 8% is just too high. 2% as a beginning tax rate is good. The 2-year cap or the 2-year option to extend is something that I would encourage you to think about. I just received a CUP for a project 2 weeks ago. We're moving expeditiously as we can, but we are probably not going to be making any money until the beginning of next year. And so that gives maybe a year and a half of time for us to participate in the taxation program. And I'm not sure if that's enough time for the city to get an accurate gauge of what the true revenue opportunity from this industry is. And I think it would be unfortunate for in 2 years to say, hey, we haven't made enough money, we're going to raise the tax. I think that will cause problems. Anyway, thank you for your time, and have a good night.
Thank you. Tawny Logan. Tawny will be followed by Shelley Browning.
Good evening, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. Got to bring my laptop up here because I was taking so many notes on what was happening. First, I wanted to just address to some of your points. Councilwoman Combs, you were discussing the cannabis impact on housing, and I think that this is something that we can pick up as we move forward into a comprehensive ordinance development. That process of bringing operators into compliance is going to open up that housing, or at least I'll venture to assume that if we give them a accessible pathway into areas that are appropriate zoning, we will be able to give more housing opportunities. And then also with the conversation of CBD and THC, there's a old stigma that I think or a new old stigma that is needing to change, and that is the concept that somehow CBDs are medicine and THC is recreational, and in fact it takes the whole plant medicine. And so the moment we start creating policy that identifies and gives benefits to CBD and kind of boxes adult use THC, we start to separate a whole plant concept. So I would warn against creating regulations that would separate them. I don't think there's anything to keep the adult use market from using CBDs, and while the THC flower may be a high value, and CBD not, when it comes to extracts and other manufactured goods, finding organic, clean CBDs is actually a high valued commodity. So that's my response to that. And then I just want to comment on the amendments that were recommended for the cannabis cultivation area. Total cultivation area is, generally defined as the entire footprint in here. And so to tax for the places in which we're producing product and generating revenue versus places where we have to conform to ADA, wheelchair accessible, wider entries. If we're going to be creating places for renewable energy and battery banks, paying a square foot tax on that would be an onerous expense. And so I wanted to support that amendment. I also, listening to the conversation tonight, really appreciate hearing Councilmember Olivares suggesting the unanimous vote for going over 5%, because I think we really do see that this 5% in all of the financial analysis that I've seen from our operators, from dozens of members now, and running these calculations, 5% is what we see as that point where there is no more revenue. At least 6 members vote to be able to go over 5% would be, I think, a responsible act in making sure that there's not an overreach later for funds when there's other city needs for finances, and all of a sudden the cannabis industry is burdened with meeting that money. Thank you.
Thank you. Shelley Browning, she'll be followed by Sarah Schrader.
Hi. Good evening, Mayor Corsi, council members, fellow community members. Honored to follow you, Tawny, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. It's such a sweet vibe, and it's pretty cool to see the elected officials and community members coming together to really work this out. I've attended a lot of the subcommittee meetings. I know you guys have worked hard on this. I'm not in the industry, I'm not a morning person, but I kept showing up just because I really care about this community and where it's all headed. So I'd just like to quote a few sentences from an article that was written by a gentleman named Saqib Bahai, entitled Dirty Deals, How Predatory Deals Hurt Taxpayers and What We Can Do About It. So he says that cities and states across the country are forced to cut essential community services because they are trapped in predatory municipal finance deals that cost them millions of dollars every year. Banks take advantage of this crisis that they help to create by targeting state and local governments with predatory municipal finance deals, just like they targeted cash-strapped homeowners with predatory mortgages during the housing boom. An Oakland study showed that the city of Oakland paid $193 million, or 19% of its total expenditures, to service its debt to the Wall Street banks in 2012. So my point about all of this, my points are as follows. So I understand that many homeowners in Sonoma County turned to growing cannabis after the 2008 crisis in order to supplement their incomes and to hold on to their homes. Now cities and towns, counties, and even the state are looking to the cannabis tax dollars to supplement their financial needs in an unbankable industry. Much of the estimated costs of the Santa Rosa cannabis tax are going towards policing and public safety. If the cannabis tax dollars were bankable, that would both reduce the public safety risks as well as help to ensure the collection of taxes for the city. A public bank could remedy many of these woes. The City of Oakland is proactively moving forward with an RFQ for a feasibility study for establishing a public bank that would include banking the cannabis dollars. The team that I am working with has done the preliminary legal research to prove that a charter city, such as Santa Rosa or Oakland, would have the constitutional right to bank the cannabis dollars, even short of the federal government changing the Schedule I classification of cannabis. My hope is that Santa Rosa will be following in Oakland footsteps in establishing a public bank. This would enable us to move our city funds from the predatory Wall Street banks into our own bank to service our community's needs and to bank the cannabis dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Schrader, and you'll be followed by Nick Caston.
I also support the idea of cannabis banking. My name is Sarah Schrader, and I've been an active member of the Sonoma County chapter of Americans for Safe Access for over 12 years. I'm a volunteer at a 501c3 in Railroad Square, and I'm also a former small business operator here in Santa Rosa. I founded Compassionate Health Options with Hanya Barth in 2003, and she still remains open in downtown Santa Rosa to this day. I want to thank the staff and the council As I have been speaking in these chambers since before our first ordinances are written, and you guys have always been at the forefront of creating cannabis policies. So I thank you for willing to take that risk and willing to be the ones to experiment with what we know are going to be policies that will be amended and changed in the future. I appreciate all the work that's been done on cannabis zoning and permits here, and I just want to acknowledge that this tax that's been proposed is more reasonable than the tax that the county is voting on today, so I thank you for that. As far as the position of Americans for Safe Access, we have always been against the taxation of cannabis. Pharmaceuticals, herbs, and edible products are not something that we tax, so it didn't make sense to us that we tax cannabis. When the Board of Equalization made their decision in 2005, we were not against that decision. In fact, we educated and promoted people to pay their taxes. However, if Santa Rosa's current sales tax rate is 8.5, and we have an increase of 15% coming through AMA, that's 23.5, and with a cap of 8, we're talking about 31.5% of tax on cannabis. I don't know any medical cannabis patients that are relying on this for their quality of life that can afford an extra $15.75 a day just to purchase an eighth of cannabis. There's no reimbursement, there's no insurance coverage, and there's no way to supplement this cost. Our chapter's concerns about this are that it's confusing for voters because they're voting on the county taxation measure today. So when they get a second ballot in the mail, that may be confusing to them. I'm also concerned that this tax is higher than any other industry in Sonoma County, which is giving cannabis users a sin tax. I'm concerned that cannabis compassion gardens, where no medicine is sold, are going to be subject to the same square footage as commercially sold cannabis gardens. I expect the cost of medicine to rise, but I think putting this additional tax is a burden on small farmers and small businesses. The only consumers of cannabis at this time are medical cannabis users. So while I heard you guys say here tonight this is not a burden to be put on patients, it's going to go through 4 permit hands and 4 types of taxes before I have to pay for it. And I'm the only one that's going to be paying for it until recreational use is available, in the sense that it's coming from the medical cannabis patients. In San Francisco Task Force, we voted to have a 1% tax, and that was a consensus-based decision because we realized the higher the tax, the less participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Caston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to start by taking a moment to commend the subcommittee and staff for the work they put into this. It's been very refreshing. I'm working in a number of just different jurisdictions and not just Sonoma County, where we have not had the opportunity to work as closely with staff and with members of the council in educating about the processes behind our industry. I think one of the important things that is recognized in what staff is presenting to you is that it's not a cannabis industry. It is 4 or 5 different distinct industries. We have farmers working in the cultivation industry. We have engineers working in the manufacturing industry. We have lab and science folks working in the lab industry. There's a bunch of different industries within this, and the nuance and the time that staff's taken to understand that really comes out in this ordinance. As a part of that, and while I appreciate our friends on the cultivation side talking about 5%, on the capital intensive side to really bring in the equipment, we actually find 3% to really be our maximum tolerance when you combine it with the fact that we can't write off our equipment and a lot of our staff off of our federal tax returns. So we end up actually paying double taxes on that at the federal level, plus we're paying the $147 a pound tax on purchasing cultivation from the state level, as well as our consumers 15% tax at point of sale on top of all of the other taxes. So as a part of your actions tonight, one of the things that we want to ask you to do during goal setting is to actually set a goal for your lobbying team to ask the state of California to actually share the Prop 64 revenue with local jurisdictions, because that revenue really should be going to these impacts that you're focusing on. With that, and I think a number of the council members, you referenced these points. I'd encourage you to look at the mechanisms of lowering the cap to 5 or 3%, increasing the vote threshold for the supermajority, or lowering where the supermajority is. So if we can't get the cap down to that 5%, if we can get the supermajority vote down to the 3%, that's a place where we could get more certainty. And while I agree with Patrick's comments that it is very difficult to work with financiers and investors, even dealing with caps and having to explain to them how it's not the intent of the council to go up to that percent, but they wanted to have the authority to go up to it. Those types of mechanisms can help us if there is a higher threshold for the vote, or if that supermajority vote is at a lower percentage point. So I encourage you to look at those, but I really want to commend staff and the entire process the city's gone through. This ordinance is going to be one of the better thought through ones in the state, and hopefully one that can start to turn the tide of the more less thought through ordinances that were popping up with really no notice. 4 days notice is not enough time for any deliberative body to receive input from the public, and that's what we've had with a lot of these other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the cards I have. Council, are there any questions at this point? There are questions. Mr. Tibbetts, go ahead.
After some of the public commenters came forward, I wanted to look up what the city of Los Angeles did on their March ballot, which is actually before the voters today. And their results should be coming in at 8:30 tonight. But they put in a 1 to 2% cap on that proposal, Measure M. And I'm wondering if, I think the number one priority of the city, what it really has to be, is to protect city services and ensure that dealing with this new industry never comes at the expense of existing city services. I mean, in fact, I'm sitting here thinking, I hope in the future we're not talking about net neutrality, we're talking about a revenue positive tax from this industry that can support what we need, like affordable housing and fixing our roads. But the second priority really has to be, I think, is coming in with a lower rate and trying to capture the entire industry that already exists here in Santa Rosa. This isn't business attraction. We're not going outside the jurisdiction to bring these businesses here. They exist. They're in our residential suburban neighborhoods. We got to get them out of those suburban houses and get them coming into our industrial zones and appropriately bring them into compliance for public health reasons, for environmental reasons. So one of the things I'd like to float to my colleagues is we consider a 3% cap with a 5-member supermajority, or we look at a 5% cap with a 6-member supermajority. And I just float that for discussion.
Mr. Rogers, you have a question?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I heard in public comment that I agree with is that this is not just about tax revenue, it's also about jobs and making sure that we have those. We do see that there are parts of the cannabis industry that do pay really well, and those tend to be the capital heavy or the capital improvement heavy aspects of the industry. Can you talk a little bit about any discussion that's occurred of allowing a certain percentage of capital improvements or investments in our community by some of these parts of the industry to do a little bit of a tax write-off and what that might look like? Would that be more of a rule that we're bringing in our overall ordinance and not in the resolution that we're going to be theoretically putting on the ballot?
So that did come up, and I did have some conversations about how to deal with capital improvements and potentially credit to a tax that's implemented. We weren't in a position at this point because of all the unknowns in the first year or two to try to figure out what that looks like. So the recommendation at this point was to wait for the second year to give us some time to develop what a program might look like and run it through subcommittees and get input, and then bring that back with what the actual revenue is, impacts, and everything else as part of a package in the second year. That can be done in the resolution phase because that's really implementation of the tax. That's not necessarily something that has to be at the voter level. That's something we can do to figure out how do we actually generate the revenue we need with that cap. So that conversation was had, and based on everything we have at this point, I didn't feel comfortable recommending that we move forward with that at this time in the first year. But we'll look at that in the future to see if that's a viable opportunity. And my guess is there'll be other things that come up over the next year that we can look at and bring forward to the council. We just don't know what's going to happen over these next 2 years. And there's a lot of movement at the state. There's a lot of, at the state level, and then that filters down to us. And so we're still working to understand all the changes that the state's making with all the bills that are coming through, how that's really going to affect us in our operation.
Mr. Ewan, you got to page 28 on your recommendations, and there are a few more pages of recommendations here. How do you want to go through these? We have a motion on the floor about the fiscal emergency.
Yeah, I think if we can act on the fiscal emergency, and then we can step into the next phase, which is a separate resolution. So the fiscal emergency is its own resolution in front of you, and it's the red line version.
Yes, we have a motion and a second on that. My understanding is that this requires a unanimous
That's correct.
vote. And contrary to what was said earlier in the meeting, having one person absent does not count as a no vote, does it?
The requirement is that it be a unanimous vote of the council members present.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote on that, council? Your votes, please. And that passes with a unanimous vote. Do you want to go to page 29?
Okay, so here's where we get into the different actions that you're going to take forward. The first action is a resolution to order a special election to be held on Tuesday, June 6th, 2017, for the purpose of submitting to the Santa Rosa voters an ordinance of the City of Santa Rosa amending Chapter 6-04 of the Santa Rosa City Code and adding Chapter 610 of the Santa Rosa City Code to authorize the City of Santa Rosa to impose a business tax on cannabis businesses. So this item here is the ordinance that we just talked about. So the changes, here's where we need to talk about the potential changes and any changes you're okay with, and approve this as amended, and we can walk through what those are before you take that vote. So I think it's probably good to stop here and clarify what that ordinance is that you are voting on.
All right.
Or if you make a motion first, and then we can. Well, let me read. I'm sorry. Let me read through them all because it's all one resolution. I'm sorry. And then we'll go back and make edits to the ordinance. The second part of this is that you'll be approving the ballot language. You'll be permitting the filing of ballot arguments, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis, and the last item would be setting an initial tax rate for a 2-year term.
Very well. Mr. Oliveris, do you want to put a motion on the table and then we'll discuss it?
Certainly, I move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa, 1, ordering a special election to be held on Tuesday, June 6, 2017, for the purpose of submitting to Santa Rosa voters an ordinance of the City of Santa Rosa, adding Chapter 6-10 to the Santa Rosa City Code and amending Chapter 6-04 of the Santa Rosa City Code to impose a cannabis industry tax on cannabis businesses operating in Santa Rosa. 2, approving ballot language. 3, permitting the filing of ballot arguments. 4, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis. And 5, setting initial tax rates for a 2-year term. And with further reading of the text.
Ms. Stricker.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify whether your motion is with the proposed ordinance you have in front of you that has the red lines with the 3 additions that staff has recommended, one being the option for cultivators to have gross receipts or square footage when you're setting your initial rate. The second is the additional language clarifying the original intent that the cultivation area, when we're taxing cultivation based on square foot, would exclude non-production areas. And the third would be the enforcement language that would refer back to section 6-04.270 that Mr. Goen read to you earlier.
And that is, yes, as amended, and I still wanted to have further discussion related to the vote over the 5%.
All right, is there a second for that?
Second.
Now, we need to discuss.
Yeah, so there are some amendments here. If there's items you want to discuss, such as the cap, the vote threshold, or any other changes, we can have that, and then we would need to amend that recommendation to include those additional items.
Right.
All right. Want to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. And I do want to acknowledge the work of the subcommittee, because it's been together for a long time. I can't remember when we started. Staff has done a tremendous job of bringing in resources, information, education, reaching out to consultants along the way to get all the information that we needed to guide the subcommittee to bring you recommendations. It was not an easy process. It was difficult. It was confusing sometimes. It was, above all, very educational for the committee members who participated in that, because it was a whole new territory for us. And I think I need to underscore that, is that it is a whole new territory. One of our speakers tonight put it very well when he says there's a lot we don't know, and there isn't. And I think that also helped to guide some of our decisions, and especially with the cap, and not going so exorbitantly high that it just didn't seem reasonable, and not going so low that we catch ourselves short, because we have to consider all of the unknowns moving forward, and what we're setting up for future councils to be able to act on without having to go back to the voters. So again, I think we've had some very deliberate and good conversations related to that, and that is why I am open to increasing the number of votes required to make any changes over the 5% limit. I think it does demonstrate to the industry that we are seriously thinking about this. We're just not randomly throwing things out, because again, there's a lot we don't know, but I think we need to put in protections that protect the city, the voters, and they also need to protect the industry out there as we move forward. So I think it's a good place to start. The actual number, I don't know. I threw out there a unanimous vote, but I'm open to discussion. But I think it's a good compromise. And I think anybody would be able to sell that to, maybe not completely, but a better chance of selling that to an investor, to talk about the process that we went through here in Santa Rosa. And we've already had comments about how different it has been here as compared to other communities. And I think that says a lot as far as how serious we are in making this happen and making it a true win-win for everybody.
So I'm just going to check in with each council member on all of these. You would leave the cap at 8% as proposed?
Yes, I would.
The vote, you're throwing out unanimous.
That's a good place to start.
Okay.
Are you throwing it out as can I clarify?
He's suggesting a unanimous vote to go above 5%. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm basing that we would do that probably based on a fiscal emergency, because we needed to go over that. So if we're going to use it today, we could obviously use it then.
All right. And the initial period of 2 years is
yes.
Also, okay.
Yes, and I think it's well spelled out in the ordinance.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify, when Councilmember Olivares is referring to unanimous, do you mean unanimous based on the number of council members present at the meeting, or do you mean a 7-member affirmative vote requirement?
Yes, that brings up a good point, because we could end up with a majority of council of 5 council members here, and I think that could be problematic. So part of the discussion is would we want to have a full council here voting so that every council member has an opportunity to weigh in on this? And again, it would be such a significant issue that they probably would want to be weighing in on it anyway. So I'll leave it up for further discussion.
All right. Mr. Tibbetts?
You know, I would like to see the cap be at 5% personally. As for unanimity, I'm less inclined for a unanimous vote. I think that a supermajority gives us some safeguard here at the city level. So I'll leave my comments to that, and I look forward to hearing the rest of my colleagues.
A supermajority of 5 or 6?
6.
And you're okay with the initial 2-year period for the initial rates?
Yes, I'm fine with the 2-year period and the proposed structure as it is.
All right. Ms. Combs?
I think I'm listening. It concerns me that if we feel the need for there to be a trigger to go from above 5, that unanimous is excessive. I can imagine that another tax base is doing very well and that we don't in fact have a full fiscal crisis, but something is going on with regard to how much it's costing us to do enforcement with the cannabis industry. So we couldn't really do the full fiscal crisis vote, but we might be interested in what the cannabis industry's taxation level is. So what I was hearing as the reason to do unanimous was related to the declaration of fiscal emergency. And I think that it's not really a comparative there because the whole city may not have a fiscal emergency. It may simply be an emergency associated with, as we did today, specific to the cannabis industry. So I would prefer a supermajority of 5 or 6. But I could also probably be talked into considering a cap below 8% and just do that, do a cap below 8%. So I would be interested in hearing my colleagues' concerns about the cap being at 8% or less. But I would hold to either a 5 or a 6 vote on the supermajority.
Thank you. Mr. Sweathelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll just go down the order. I'm supportive of staff's recommendation of 8%, and I could either support the 6 out of 7 supermajority consistent with Measure O language or the unanimous 7 out of 7, because again, as I heard staff saying, we're trying to predict what may trigger one of these things, and I don't think we can articulate it here today what may be in the future. The first year, the 2-year terms, and again, any of those would be anytime we go above the 5%.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
What I'm hearing, and I think we really need to be cognizant of, is if we go over that 5%, we likely don't have revenue coming in, whether it be from the industry moving out of Santa Rosa or people staying in the black market entirely. So I'm inclined to go lower than that 8%. I, in the subcommittee, tried to argue for 6, tried to negotiate for it. I still think that that's an appropriate level. If we stay at 8%, I'd throw out to my colleagues that we go with the 6 out of 7 vote threshold, but at 4% instead of 5%, just to add some certainty to it. Again, I'm trying to strike that balance between covering our costs, but also not going so high that we have to come back. And I do think that going back to the voters a couple of years from now, if we needed to, looking at the effects of this, it's always going to be easier to go back and say we need to raise the cap than it ever would be to come back and say to voters, no, we need to lower the cap. I think that'll be far less palatable for them.
Thank you. This has been interesting. We're dealing with a lot of unknowns here. Unknowns from the city side, unknowns from the industry side. And clearly you can all see that the members of the council don't like dealing with unknowns. It's never a comfortable position to be in. But we're not going to know until this industry gets up and running, until our city regulatory and permitting and enforcement efforts are up and running. We're not going to know until we actually try this and give it some time. My impression, having not been part of the cannabis subcommittee, is that this has been a really careful and deliberative and fairly exhaustive process, particularly compared to some of the others that we've heard about around the state. I'm going to respect that. We need to protect the city's interests here. We need to protect our general fund. And I think that starting where we are with 2% is very reasonable. I haven't heard anybody objecting to that. I doubt that we're going to be able to get anywhere near 5% in any kind of a short period of time. You know, I see increments much smaller than that. And so I'm going to support keeping the cap at 8%. I don't mind having a supermajority to go over 5%, but I've got some real problems with having a unanimity requirement for anything that the council does. I mean, I know that some things are by law require unanimity, but I don't want to impose that on ourselves when we don't have to. That gives one person veto power. It's not a healthy situation. I think we've seen it in other partnerships that we're involved in, and I would not support that. I would support a supermajority of 5. And also the 2-year initial period here. So if anybody's been keeping score.
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
I believe I'm the second. And for the amendments as suggested to go through, I need to agree to them, I think. So one of the things that I agree with you, so I would look to the person who has the motion, Councilmember Oliveras. Would you modify your amendments to the motion to take a supermajority at 5?
And the cap at 8.
Is that your proposition that the cap be at 8?
Yeah, mine was 8, and I was going to be okay with the 6, but
I'm okay with 6 also if you want to go to 6.
yeah. So I guess I would make the motion to keep the cap at 8% and using a supermajority of 6 council members.
And not 5, but 6.
And again, I'm trying to give some certainty to the industry as well. So, and I know 5 was a recommendation, but you know, I'm willing to listen more.
I thought I heard you say you would consider the cap at 6.
Right. Right. I just did. Yes.
I don't mean the number of people.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
I mean the cap.
No, the rate at 8 and the number of votes to change it, to move it over 5, I would be okay with 6.
He did not, he said 8% cap.
Okay, I must have misheard.
Mr. Schwedhelm?
So, Mr. Mayor, what I heard you say, you're comfortable with the motion as it was read because the staff was 5 out of 7. Am I hearing that correct? So we wouldn't need a friendly amendment. So what I would offer would be a friendly amendment of upping the vote, if it goes above 5%, to 6 out of 7 council members, consistent with Measure O.
I'm seeing the
No, I get that,
seconder
but just to be clear,
shaking
what
hand.
you are suggesting is what is in the original motion by Councilmember Oliveras, correct?
Yes.
The council member is, I am uncomfortable going to 6 with an 8% cap. I would want to stay at 5 with an 8% cap.
Mr. Rogers.
I'll offer and see if there's any interest in doing 6 out of 7 at 4% as sort of a go-between what I'm hearing from Councilmember Combs and hearing from Councilmember Oliveras.
Sure, I'll second that. Oh, sorry.
I'm just gauging interest.
So, I'm hearing you. So, again, I do want to reassure the industry that we are supportive of what's going on here, and I think we put a lot of energy and effort into this. So, again, my motion then would be to stay with the staff recommendation of an 8% cap and a supermajority vote of the council of 5 council members at a cap of 8%. So I'm suggesting the staff recommendation.
And the supermajority would be to go to more than 5%.
Would be, right, would be the supermajority, and what I'm hearing is that you would agree to have 5 council members, being that the supermajority, correct?
Yes.
May I ask a clarification? My understanding is that Councilmember Rogers was asking that the trigger for the 5-member supermajority vote
Hold on just a
be
second. Okay.
lowered to 4.
Just hold on one sec. The motion is here, modified. You were the second.
Which is why I'm asking for a clarification.
Right, I heard what he said, but the motion is for 8% cap and a supermajority of 5 council members to move it over 5%.
And we were talking about a 2-year time period, and I'm happy to second that.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we pick up Mr. Rogers' intent, which I thought was to lower the trigger from 5%.
It was, but the motion
to 4.
remains at what was just made.
Okay,
And
I'm verifying that.
We have a second on that.
I'm verifying that the motion is staying there.
Yes. Are we clear on where we are right now? Do we have further discussion? I'm sorry,
We
Mr.
have a motion, and it was seconded by Councilmember
seconded.
Combs.
Yes. Do we have further discussion on this motion? Can I have your votes, please? And we have 6 ayes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your participation. I seem to have lost my agenda. Hang on just a second.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're at written communications.
Item 17.1, letters of support for SB 1, Transportation Funding, SB 2, Building Homes and Jobs Act, SB 3, Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2018, and AB 1, Transportation Funding provided for information.
Councilor, are there any questions on any of these communications? Mr. Rogers?
No, I really appreciate you providing them to us. I just wanted to make sure that when we write letters of support, we do send them to the legislative delegation, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Are there any cards for final public comment? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.